Boruto 2 Blue Vortex's Sand Village Showdown arc, it raises the stakes to an entirely different level as the war against Jura, it hits another gear due to Jura and his army learning something established in early Naruto: when a shinobi has something precious to protect, and when a shinobi has embraced the feeling of love, they can tap into the true power, and we see shining examples of that with Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan power quite literally exploding and Kawaki awakening the full attack power Ishiki. Both of these are a byproduct of love, and Jura is about to learn love is more than romance, and love makes shinobi pass their limits. This is the Sand Village Showdown arc. With Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 16, the shipping war battle between Sarada versus Class Rapid is heated up in the fight for Boruto's heart. But given how tense things are in universe, it is, as you would expect, not the primary focus of the chapter. So we open up the chapter going right back to that time skip era following defeat of Sasuke, but this time we're jumping ahead after the scene in chapter 13 where Kashin Koji agrees to train Boruto. Keeping true to his word, Kashin Koji starts explaining to Boruto how space-time ninjutsu works, revealing that what Shinobi referred to as being space-time ninjutsu is really just a basic power for the Otsutsuki clan, and that while Boruto's been shown being able to use this very basic power, it's always been as a fluke because Boruto cannot control it. But that hope, it isn't lost. Kashin Koji has seen the future, and he tells Boruto that he will one day learn space-time ninjutsu, but in the future timeline that he saw it occur, it took Boruto 6 years to learn to do so. This was a little refreshing to see, because one thing that Boruto's gotten a lot of flack for from fans, for right or for wrong, is that he learns jutsu way too fast. A lot of fans expect him to stumble and bumble his way to learn jutsu like Naruto, even though those same fans have no problem with Minato being stated in the Minato one-shot manga to be a prodigy who learns jutsu super fast by Kushina, and Boruto numerous times has been compared to Minato and Sasuke. But in short, Boruto chooses to learn space-time ninjutsu and do so the shinobi way and not the Otsutsuki way. Boruto does this by making metal objects with this chakra, marking those objects, and then using sensory jutsu to sense out their location, which allows him to teleport to whatever he's marked. When he first started training in the future to learn this, Boruto started out with kunai and shuriken, basic ready-made ninja tools, and even used Sasuke's sword at one point, doing his best to mimic the flying Raijin that his grandfather Minato made famous. But Boruto ended up doing to the flying Raijin the same thing he did with the Rasengan. Just as he made his own lightning release vanish from Rasengan by mistake when attempting to learn the Rasengan, Boruto ended up making his own variant of the flying Raijin, thus making Boruto's jutsu its own jutsu, despite it operating mostly the same, which is in line with what Kishimoto told us in 2015 for Boruto's character. Instead of following all the steps from A to Z, Boruto learns steps A through E, and then he skips to Z because he thinks he understands enough of the basics to jump ahead. Boruto knows the shortcuts and isn't afraid to exploit them. So what happens here is that when Boruto hears from Kashin Koji that a future version of himself was able to make his own variation of the flying Raijin without actually being taught the flying Raijin, Boruto goes like, my god, I really am a genius. And this leads to a training montage where we see future Boruto training to learn the jutsu and going through the trial and error fashion. And Kashin Koji reveals to Boruto that future Boruto would do things like mark spoons and forks and decorations. If it was metal, Boruto would use as a marker, which is pretty clever because no one would think twice about these ordinary household items. However, that's where we learn one of the weaknesses that Boruto in the future had to train to overcome. At first, he needed the items that he marked to be in his direct line of sight, which for obvious reasons, it makes it a jutsu that is pretty easy to figure out the weakness if you use it too much. Koji explains that over time, Boruto discovered the weaknesses to his flying Raijin. If he marked two places that were too close to each other, like say a tree stump on one side and a tree trunk that is only a few feet away from it, Boruto wasn't going to be able to control which marker he teleported to, which, as you can see, that's another problem. Look back at what Minato did when he took down those stone ninja in the third ninja war and he made them retreat. He had over 80 kunai marked mark, ready to be thrown, likely in close range to each other, and he could teleport back and forth between them as he saw fit with no issues. But future Boruto, he doesn't have that skill, which led to him having to think outside the box. Boruto over time decided to use metal symbols specifically made into various shapes, the very same ones that we see on the clothes that Boruto wears, in order to make it easier to lock in on his chakra signature. All he has to do is sense out his chakra and visualize what shape he wants to teleport to, and he's able to teleport there across long distances. It still requires work on his end. He can't do it in a split second in the way that Minato and Tobirama did, which is why Boruto still has to make the concentration hand seal when he uses the jutsu, but he at the very least has found a creative solution around the problem that he had. But there's yet another weakness for Boruto. The further away that he teleports, the more time he needs to concentrate, which makes Boruto realize that the training ahead of him is about to be difficult, which that makes sense. Even being given the answers to the test doesn't mean anything when you still gotta learn the steps in order to get to the answer. Basically, you have to show your work. This is where Kashin Koji takes things a step further to explain to Boruto how dangerous it is, what it is they're doing. He tells him, think about it for a second. The future you needed 6 years of trial and error to learn this stuff, yet here you're able to figure out how to use the jutsu and avoid all the pitfalls in only a few minutes of conversation. Don't let that relax you. You still need to double down on your training, and this is where we see the growth in Boruto's character. He uses Flying Raijin, and he tells Koji that he is committed to learning the steps one by one, no matter how long it takes, which shows that he's finally learned what Sasuke was trying to teach him. There are no shortcuts. Shortcuts, they get you sloppy results that can fool the untrained eye, but ultimately they will be your downfall when you face the wrong enemy. We then jump forward a little further where Boruto and Koji, they're back in Orochimaru's hideout, where Koji explains to Boruto the importance of keeping the information about the future to themselves, something that Boruto doesn't understand. At his heart, Boruto is very much Naruto's child. If there's something that he can do to help someone, he will do it, no hesitation. So if you tell Boruto that class rep is going to be run over by a bus at 1 p.m. tomorrow because she doesn't look both ways before crossing the street, Boruto will tell her wait until later to cross the street to prevent that from happening. Koji's basically telling him, due to the way that time flows, if you tell people what is coming, it will alter the flow of time. In short, it messes with this 10 directions power. He sees the future, but the future is not set in stone, and even though he sees all possible futures, when you inform someone of what's coming too much in detail, they will behave in a way that changes their behavior, and it alters the future he saw, which makes unforeseen possible branches come into existence, which means that he can't accurately predict what's going to happen next. He's trying to mitigate the risk as much as possible, control the variables, if you will. And that makes sense. He told Boruto, this is the darkest possible timeline, where you save Sasuke but Jura kills you. If we're going to save Sasuke but keep you alive, we have to play our cards very carefully. It's the weakness to 10 directions. He can see all these possible outcomes, but if Boruto changes things as they walk down this path they're on, and these new branches get made, he won't be able to predict what happens next. That's why Koji is making it a point to tell Boruto only as much as he needs to know, because too much knowledge, it will destroy the future they're trying to preserve, because he is liable to act in a way that would be differently than how he otherwise would. If they are to get to a point in time, the good future where they can win, they can't let too many people know too much about what's going on. And Koji tells Boruto that their job is to support from the shadows as much as possible to ensure that we get to that good ending. Koji basically tells Boruto that he and Koji, they are two sides of the same coin in this equation, which is fitting. Boruto wanted to be the Shadow Hokage, and now he's being thrust into that position. Koji is preparing Boruto to become the version that we see in the present timeline, who is bottling up his emotions. He's being cold and calculated. He's being forced to bury the old, fun-loving, big-hearted Boruto. If the future's to survive, that Boruto has to stay hidden, no matter how painful that experience is. And not too many people have picked up on how much Boruto's hurting. This leads to Koji telling Ada, speaking out in the open, I know that you're going to be seeing this at some point. And it's basically Koji putting her on notice too. The information you just heard, if we're going to survive, you cannot share this information. And it makes sense. Konoha has been using Ada as a surveillance camera to pick up on all the extra details and plan. But now she has to be careful with what information she gives. And she, at the very least, has to understand the assignment enough to not share right away when Sarada and Class Rep are pushing her for more info. She merely tells him that Boruto, he has his reasons. Good ones for not telling him the truth about his intentions, trying to avoid putting people who he cares about in danger. And this one statement by Ada, it starts the cat fight between the two girls who are most often used as ship bait for Boruto's heart. After Sarada expresses her frustration that Boruto's once again trying to do everything alone, suffering for the sake of others, a callback to Boruto Naruto Next Generation's chapter 80, where she learns about omnipotence and she openly asks, why does it always have to be Boruto who suffers? She wants to help Boruto, but Boruto is carrying that cross on his back alone yet again, which leads to class rep stepping in and preparing to drop a nuke on the whole scene. She tells Sarada that it is better for them not to get involved, to not chase after Boruto, and she doubles down on it when Sarada says that Boruto's fighting enemies too powerful to fight all alone. And she correctly says that if Boruto had fought alone a few chapters ago, he would have been killed, and she's not wrong. Full power Rasengan Uzuhiko, it is strong. At almost full power, he was almost able to completely destroy Hidari, but in order to use that level of power, he had to keep his feet on the ground, which makes him vulnerable for attack. It's a jutsu that he can't use at near full power unless he has support, which that is what Sarada provides him. Class rep hears all that and she says that their mere presence is why Boruto got shot, which she isn't wrong here. However, it is important to note that Boruto got shot not due to Sarada and Sumire, but instead because of Kawaki, but that doesn't stop her from basically telling Sarada in so many words that she needs to be considering how Boruto feels and to use her brain a little bit, which is what she herself is doing, and she expected Sarada to do the same thing. She says that she can tell Boruto's hurting, being closed off from the people he cares for, and as much as she wants to speak to him, she knows that she can't, and that's where the nuke finally drops. Class rep tells Sarada not only is she refusing to consider Boruto's feelings, she isn't even considering Sumire's feelings at all. In short, that hug from chapter 5 where Sarada rushes forward and she hugs Boruto, class rep, she didn't forget it. And she was every bit as hurt as her expression showed. She felt betrayed by Sarada because she knows that Sarada knew that she liked Boruto, which is a callback to Boruto's Vessel arc where she asked Sarada if it bothered her that girls like Boruto, and class rep outright let it be known that, hey, it bothers her a lot. The way that Sarada ran into Boruto's arms, it hurt her, and she took that personally. While she does understand why Sarada did it, and she does make it known like she wants to understand Sarada's feelings for Boruto more in so many words, but right now, class rep's letting it be known that she suffered emotional damage from Sarada hugging Boruto, which leaves Sarada speechless, and Ada being my spirit animal as she's so caught up in watching all this drama, the unintentional yet potentially intentional gaslighting by Sumire here, and Ada, she just wants to see it all play out. This leads us back to class rep running out the room, leaving Sarada bewildered, looking stunned at her back, while Shikamaru is asking to meet with Ada. The elders are speaking with the feudal lord, and he is every bit as you would expect, pissed off that both Boruto and Sasuke have not been killed 3 years later, asking why didn't they kill Boruto when they had him captured, and the feudal lord starts throwing his weight around, which reminder, he bankrolls the village, basically telling the elder, if you can't kill Boruto and you can't kill Sasuke for the death of Naruto, someone who is the feudal lord's good friend, there's gonna be repercussions. Meanwhile, when Shikamaru shows up, Ada tells Shikamaru when he's complaining about having to meet her face to face that he should consider himself lucky that they're speaking face to face, because he would have gotten in trouble with the sensory unit because she knows that he helped Boruto escape, but she also informs him about the birth of Ryu and the fact that Gar, he's been sealed away in Shinki's Iron Sand, but if Ryu ever reaches Gar, then he can undo the seal and eat the Kazekage. Ada then reveals that she has a risk to using her Senrigan now, because when she does so, Mamushi is able to view her right back whenever she uses the Senrigan Eye, and she doesn't know what would happen if she tried to watch Mamushi and the others in real time, only that she knows she is in danger, which is why she only watches Mamushi and the others a few hours after events transpire, when it appears to be safe, which is another small nugget that Mamushi is indeed a threat to Ada moving forward, and this is a really good introduction of a neutralizer to Ada's Senrigan power. Once Ada calls Shikamaru on letting Boruto escape, she tells him, don't worry about it, I'm not going to rat you out to anybody because I still need you, and she also reveals that Boruto's still in her mind. A few chapters ago, she was shown wanting to speak to Boruto, and she's doubling down on it now, meaning that cat fight between Sarada and class rep, it was almost a three-way, a triple threat for the heart of Boruto, because if Sarada hugging Boruto got that kind of reaction on class rep, you can only imagine what the older woman in the room expressing her interest in Boruto would do, which is a reminder, Ada is 4 years older than both Sarada and class rep. Ada is 19 years old right now, and if Boruto's a man of culture, he's definitely picking Ada. It's then that Ada refocuses on everything by saying that Kawaki, he's working with Boruto for the time being, and it's in Shikamaru's best interest to stay out of their way. That's when Kashin Koji's toad appears on the back of Ada's neck, and he says he wants the team of Sarada, Konohamaru, and Mitsuki sent to the Land of Wind because Ryu and Matsuri be there, and they also need to get 2 ninja from the hidden sand village in order to work with them. He tells Shikamaru, hey, figure it out, get the team together, say what you got to do. But he also warns Shikamaru, under no circumstances do you ever allow Himawari to leave the village, because if that happens, she's gonna die at the hands of Jura. Now, this is where you might be asking, why doesn't Jura just walk into the village full of pain and just kill everybody and say, bring me Himawari? Well, the reason why is what Kashin Koji tells us. Apparently, when Jura came to Konoha, he was so impressed with what he saw in Konoha that he doesn't want to battle anyone inside of the village, which is code for Jura was so impressed by the books that he saw there that he doesn't want to damage any of the books, which either means that my man saw some great philosophical works or he found Jiraiya's pervy books. But the idea of Jura walking into a bookstore to start a reading club, it is hilarious. But Kashin Koji tells Shikamaru basically, hey, if this guy wants to go into a bookstore, you let him. You treat him like the most important customer ever. You don't piss him off, or else everyone dies. And he tells Shikamaru, hey, inform all the teams being dispatched. If they ever run into Jura outside of Konoha, run away immediately. Flee on sight. Do not pass go. When Koji then commends Shikamaru for going against his village, in spite of the risk that it puts Shikamaru in, he also tells Shikamaru to follow his heart moving forward. Very vague words. This makes Ada start repeating the words in her head, and then we transition over to the Land of Wind, where Sarada, Mitsuki, and Konohamaru, they have arrived just outside the hidden sand village, joined by Araya and Yodo, showing off their new time skip designs, with Araya no longer showing that full body mask that he did. He's the puppet master from the tuning exams in part 1. Instead, he is proudly showing off that facial hair that came from the guy hitting puberty during the time skip, which is a reminder because I've seen people confused why he has a beard. Boys can start growing facial hair as early as 11 years old, and in the case of people like me, you can start getting a goatee and etc. at 14, 15, 16. And Yodo, she now has her jacket from part 1 completely undone, showing off a tube top and wearing low-rise jeans, and she's wearing vintage rework waist straps. That's not a thong like people on Annie Twitter have been incorrectly saying. She's not in her only Kunoichi saga like people are joking. The low-rise jeans and rework waist straps are part of a fashion trend that came back into style back in 2021, and Ikimoto, being the fashion nut that he is, he's adding it to the manga like he's done with other trends with Boruto characters, like Boruto wearing the belts the way he does, Kawaki with those jackets, Sarada, Chocho, class rep, Himawari, and etc. Back to the story though, we then end off where we see the team travel across the desert in the Land of Wind, and Yodo, she's taking the time to start making some girl talk with Sarada, and she does so at the wrong time possible. She's asking Sarada, hey, you look different. You changed your look for a guy. I know you like somebody. Who is he? And she's making Sarada flustered, and the timing after class rep just blew up Sarada's spot. Is hilariously bad timing. Yet we don't linger on that for too long, thank God, because Konohamaru spots Matsuri and Ryu having killed one of Kashin Koji's toads, and the pair, they are openly stating that the toad is a sign they're getting closer to Boruto. In the story, it leaves us off wondering if this group of shinobi is going to engage with Ryu and Matsuri, which of course will happen in the next chapter. And as we're about to see, this mission in the Sand Village, or rather outside the Sand Village, is about to take a turn for the worse. Now, with this newest chapter of Boruto to Blue Vortex, chapter 17, one of the things that we start exploring very deeply and controversially is the whole concept of the human heart and whether or not beings that aren't human can feel human emotions like love and betrayal and friendship. And what we see in this is that characters like Sarada and Konohamaru, they are following the orders that Shikamaru gave them, and that makes things worse because Shikamaru is telling them, get close, and then once you get close, make sure you betray them, because because that's the only way they stand a chance at being able to defeat this very formidable duo that they see outside the Sand Village. And one mistake is death. So we open up the chapter with Sarada struggling with the emotions that are heavy in her heart, replaying Sumire's words in the last chapter, telling her that she hasn't thought enough about Boruto's emotions or Sumire's own feelings about Boruto that Sarada is aware of. As she replays that moment in her head where she hugged Boruto, Mitsuki notices right away that something is wrong with his teammate, but he wisely chooses to table the whole conversation because now it's not the time to ask her what's going on with her heart. Even though he can clearly see that her mind, it is back in Konoha and it's not in the Land of Wind. We then see Matsuri give us a major reveal that in hindsight makes a lot of sense. The trees are connected to the awakened Shinju and they gain information from those trees, and Ryu is used as a vehicle for the audience to learn how this is possible because he states that, hey, we're in the desert and there are no trees around, so how are you getting this information? And Matsuri tells us that trees, they are everywhere, including underground, and that should make you think back to something very familiar from the Naruto manga, Zetsu. Zetsu was the primary info gatherer for the Akatsuki, and long before the group was even formed, he was gathering info on the several dozens of reincarnates of Ashura and Indra, going all the way back to Ashura and Indra themselves, where he's shown in filler episodes trying to gaslight Indra. The way in which Zetsu moved around the world so easily is he moved underground using the roots under the ground, which allowed him to conceal himself in plain sight, undetectable by hiding in the roots, in the trees, and even in sand, which is where they happen to be. This is one of the many subtle instances where the world building from Naruto is further built upon in Boruto, and it's given a twist. Matsuri's doing the same thing that Zetsu did. She's using the roots. Unbeknownst to them, Yodo is listening to this whole conversation that Matsuri and Ryu are having, and it's because of how her ninjutsu abilities work, which we learn in Boruto Part 1, they are sound-based. While she primarily was shown whipping her hair around in order to make high-frequency sonic booms, we also learned that her ears are extremely sensitive in hearing as well, being able to hear from long distances, which that should make you look back to her having headphones in her ears when she wasn't in an active ninja role. So active ninja role would be in the tuning exams where deceit is a part of the whole thing, or on a mission. It should make you look at all that differently because the headphones might have been used as a way to block out the noise from things that she would otherwise hear. Hence the headphones and the music that we saw her listening to in chapter 2 of the manga. Yodo relays to Konohamaru that the duo is tracking Boruto using a sensory jutsu that she isn't familiar with, and she tells Konohamaru that it won't be long before Matsuri realizes that they are there, which that makes sense. Sooner rather than later, Matsuri would learn the location, or rather Yodo is assuming that this is the case given how much she doesn't understand about Matsuri's power. They have to assume that they won't be able to sneak up on her without a distraction, which leads to Konohamaru taking charge of the situation. Everything up until that point, it is lined up with the information that Shikamaru has given him, and as he begins to go into action, he too notices what Mitsuki did, which is that Sarada is extremely distracted because her mind is still going over what happened in the last chapter with Class Rep and replaying why she was hugging Boruto inside of her mind, which leads to Sarada getting called out by Konohamaru, and she quickly says that she'll be ready to fight when the time comes. We then learn that the reason for that battle that is coming is all because their goal is to retrieve the Thorn Soul Bulb that comes from taking down Ryu, because getting the Thorn Soul Bulb and returning it to the tree where the original person is sealed away inside of, it will restore them back to normal. This leads to a fight between Yodo and Araya, who warns her to not do anything reckless in her attempt to rescue Shinki. The passionate response out of Yodo when it comes to rescuing Shinki gets Sarada's mind completely out of her own emotional turmoil, and the expression on her face implies that she's coming to understand what Yodo herself is dealing with in terms of the pressure and confusion as she is, potentially with Yodo having feelings for Shinki. After Yodo tells Konohamaru that this is just normal for them to fight in this manner, Konohamaru wants to make sure that everyone understands their assignments for this mission. It's a divide and conquer plan. It's at this point that Matsuri, she notices Konohamaru as he, Sarada, and Mitsuki begin walking down the sand dunes to meet them, and hidden in plain sight are Yodo and Araya as they wait for their moment to reveal themselves. Konohamaru tells them that they are tracking Boruto's location, and when Ryo sees them, he defers to Matsuri's command because she is the older of the two, but this is where it gets really really interesting. Matsuri, she is falling completely in love with Konohamaru, blushing hard with dilated pupils as she meets Konohamaru's eyes, and she can't even bring herself to look at Konohamaru in the face any further, telling Ryu that he's to take over from this point onward. This takes us back to Shikamaru's conversation that he had with Konohamaru just prior to the team being assembled for the mission. Shikamaru tells Konohamaru about the Thorn Soul Bulb being a key to saving those sealed away in the tree, and they cannot allow them to escape once they do destroy the awakened Shinju, because the Thorn Soul Bulbs, if they're not used to restore those sealed away, then the awakened Shinju, they'll just be reborn, making it pointless to fight them. Konohamaru then asks Shikamaru, hey, how do you know this information? Because we weren't even able to get this intel from Boruto when we interrogated him, which that leads to a couple big moments here. The toad that Kashin Koji uses to communicate is inside of Shikamaru's jacket, hidden behind his collar, and Shikamaru basically pulls rank on Konohamaru. He's in so many words telling him, listen, I'm the Hokage, you're the Jonin, you don't get to question me. I got the intel, I judged it to be valuable, I'm giving it to you, now it's your job to take the info that I have and follow the plan that I'm giving you. Shikamaru's plan is one that is based in cold hard logic. It's a one-on-one battle. The Shinju, they would kill most of the people who they go after, and they each have targets that they are going after in order to devour. It's for that reason they must be viewed as enemies, but Shikamaru states that they aren't inherently good or evil. They still can be made one way or the other. He says to think of them as being newly born wild animals, but because they're newly born, they aren't a full threat because they operate off of instinct. Their curiosity, it can make them pause, and they're going through their own stages of humanity while being influenced via the chakra of the original, because chakra contains memories, chakra contains emotion, which makes Hidari an interesting case, and the potential of an Itachi figure rising up inside the awakened Shinju, namely Hidari, is something very much real, and it's something that you have to keep your eyes on moving forward. This is a bit of a departure from what we had in Boruto earlier, and this is something that is a lot closer to what we had in Naruto. In Boruto, the villains in part 1 especially, they were designed purposely to be pieces of trash. They weren't meant to be someone that you felt sorry for. You didn't feel sorry for Momoshiki, you just knew he was evil. The same with Jigen, Shojoji, and Ishiki. They were trash who did not have these sobbing backstories. They were evil for the sake of being evil, which was the story reflecting on a harsh truth about humanity, which is that among us, there are people who walk among us who they can't be redeemed. For every character like an Owl or a Kawaki who showed bits of good side of humanity where they could be redeemed, we had several monsters who were beyond saving at the point that you met them. You just knew on an instinctual level, hey, these guys, they got to be destroyed. What we're getting at here is that the awakened Shinju, their instincts are to devour humans, but they're in that funky space where they can either go left or right depending on the circumstances they find themselves in. It's because of that information you have a window to destroy them, because the moment they can act off instinct without giving a second thought, you're essentially done. They're slowly being presented as being like the Naruto villains, where one thing happens and they fully embrace their villain saga, but unlike Naruto villains who weren't fully evil in nature, these Shinju at the basic level still want to destroy humans by eating them, which leads to Konohamaru saying, at the end of the day, we still have to kill them. So why tell me this information? It changes nothing. The reason is that Shikamaru wants to exploit their curiosity about humans and them being so young in nature. He wants Konohamaru to lead Team 7 to bond with these Shinju, become their friends, and then they kill Ryu and Matsuri. He's saying it's an underhanded tactic, one that Naruto would definitely never agree with, but he says, listen fam, I'm not Naruto, and I don't really care what Naruto would have approved of. From a coldly logical perspective, this gives them the best shot at victory, in theory, and it just makes you go back to how Kawaki and Shikamaru's relationship appeared to change during the time skip when we see how Kawaki was behaving towards Shikamaru in chapter 1 or 2 Blue Vortex very honorably. Now we see why there was a switch. It wasn't just that Shikamaru's memories of hating Kawaki are now transferred to Boruto. Kawaki at his core, he is a consequentialist. As long as the desired results are reached, who cares what the costs are and who cares what moral lines you have to cross? That's basically the approach that Shikamaru is taking as Hokage. Whereas Naruto would care about those moral lines, Shikamaru says, I don't care. This is someone who Kawaki could have vibed with. And we see it with Konohamaru that he's not fully comfortable with this approach. He's more comfortable with the one that Naruto would have took, which is as Shikamaru said, for the sake of humanity's survival, this is the only way. It's underhanded, but it must be done. We then jump back to Konohamaru approaching the duo, and we see Konohamaru bearing his displeasure at what he's about to do by extending a peace offering. He basically says they're both after Boruto, so why don't they work together? And the whole time Konohamaru is speaking to Ryu, Matsuri is hiding behind Ryu's back, unable to look at Konohamaru fully in the eyes, and she's blushing like crazy, all while Yodo monitors the situation from afar undetected. Unfortunately for Boruto, as they begin working together, Mitsuki has found one of the metal pieces that Boruto uses for teleportation, which confirms the intel that Matsuri had that the toad they killed belonged to Boruto. However, the problem for Boruto is that in just that one short battle, Mitsuki has already broken down how Boruto uses flying Raijin to teleport, whereas Minato would use seals, undetectable seals at that. Boruto uses specific pieces of metal, physical pieces of metal, and Mitsuki was able to figure that out on his own during that short battle, and it speaks volumes to the type of shinobi that being a clone of Orochimaru has made him. And it just goes back to a common theme from Naruto. Your special move jutsu that is supposed to be something that you never use too many times in battle against the same person or in front of too many people, because like Itachi told to Naruto, every jutsu has a weakness, and as Tsunade told to Sakura when she trained her, skilled shinobi are aware of this, and they try to hide their weaknesses in their jutsu as they fight. They camouflage them, but extremely skilled shinobi are always able to break down the weaknesses, even if they aren't taken out very quickly. Mitsuki is still very young, but he is in a very high class of shinobi. As Konohamaru begins to speak to Matsuri, who is now so red in the face that she can't even breathe properly, and she's got her hand on her chest to try to steady her breathing, Sarada and Mitsuki get Ryu to leave with them under the belief that they'll work better by splitting up from each other. And this is where we see why Kashin Koji's plan is the way that it is. It's to split up the two Shinju to keep them from fighting together, which is smart. One will be caught up in her feelings where she's feeling so wet at the sight of Konohamaru that she does not see the Rasengan coming until it's too late. The other is going to be a victim of a good old-fashioned handicap match where everyone just jumps on top of him and they beat the brakes off of him. However, for as simple and as brilliant as his plan is, it does come with some risk. Ryu reveals that his instincts were to just slaughter every ninja that he ran into, but Jura told Ryu and the other Shinju that they weren't able to harm any of the ninja inside of Konoha that they meet, basically that they are off limits now, which is basically something we can thank Shikadai for leaving such a strong impression on Jura. His actions during that skirmish where Jura wanted to capture Himawari, it left such a strong impression on him that he basically made Konoha shinobi from this point onward off limits unless they're provoked or unless they are the target of one of the awakened Shinju. That brings us back to another flashback where Shikamaru tells Konohamaru that the reason Matsuri will be his problem to deal with is because she has strong romantic feelings for Konohamaru, and it's because deep inside of Moegi she has feelings for Konohamaru that she's not come to understand either, which makes that moment in part 1 where Ada teased Konohamaru about Moegi feel like a bit of foreshadowing now. Ada saw something with her Simrigan that made it clear both parties had feelings to each other that they weren't aware of. Shikamaru is telling Konohamaru take advantage of that situation, while Sarada and Mitsuki split Ryu away from him and ignore how uncomfortable all this makes Konohamaru. Konohamaru, being the Riz god that he is, he gets Matsuri to sit down next to him, and she's sitting with her hands between her legs and she's looking down, blushing, unable to look me in the eyes, in a pose that quite a few of you guys have DM'd me saying, hey, this looks like how Sarada looked when she sat next to Boruto in chapter 6 of Two Blue Vortex. But Matsuri tells Konohamaru this isn't how she normally acts, and Konohamaru tells her, hey, what you're feeling is completely natural, just relax. Somewhere in Ninja Heaven, Asuma, he's smiling as he's watching Konohamaru riz up Matsuri the same way he rizzed up Kurenai on the night that they conceived Mirai. And then 9 months later, the big homie Hidan stepped up, helped him skip child support payments for having a child outside of wedlock. Meanwhile, as this is going on, the toad that has been placed behind Ada's hair, it instructs her to look in on what's happening in the Sand Village, and when Ada gets worried about Mamushi, Kashin Koji tells her, hey, he should be at their hideout, so don't worry. Now, seeing some people confused as to why he's having Ada look to see what's going on in the present, because they're going, hey, he's got 10 directions, so he can see the future. So why does he need to know what's currently going on? Because he should know. Plot hole. It's not a plot hole. So Let's clear that up right now, because if that's you, you're overlooking something. Kashin Koji can see multiple possible timelines. The key word there being possible. Time does not flow in only one direction. There are multiple branches that occur when decisions are made. Kashin Koji can see each of those branches, regardless as to if they happen or not. One decision is made in the present, and all those other branches, they cease to exist. They never happen, but Kashin Koji himself is aware of their existence and everything that happened. He retains that knowledge, even though those timelines, they have ceased to exist. That's why he needs Ada. Notice he says Momushi should be at their base. The key word there being should, meaning there's a chance that he isn't there, even though the probability is high based on what he had seen. And with the 10 directions and the multiple alternate timelines, he needs to know exactly what's currently going on to ensure that things are playing out exactly as he planned. Because if you run into a scenario where someone behaves differently than they normally would, that power, it is useless. After all, what good are having all these big brain plans when some blunderhead messes up the whole timeline that you had seen? It's invalidated. This leads to Kashin Koji and Boruto getting into a bit of a fight, showing that anyone who wanted Boruto and Kashin Koji to have this Naruto and Jiraiya relationship, you are mistaken. Boruto tells Kashin Koji to not lie to him and to tell him the truth when he asks, what are the percentages that Sarada, Konohamaru, and Mitsuki will fail? When Koji tells him it's not that high that they'll fail, Boruto loses it because that's a non-answer, and it is a subjective answer. Not high, it can mean that, hey, they got a 60% chance of victory, but that's still a 40% chance of failure. Theoretically, if we're in an airplane and I put an airbag in your hands and say, jump out of this plane, and you got a 40% chance that it's not going to open, would you jump out the plane with that airbag? You probably wouldn't, and Boruto is basically saying the same thing here. This leads to Koji telling Boruto that under no circumstances must he leave, because just as Himawari leaving Konoha will result in her death, if Boruto arrives on the battlefield, it will summon Jura, and he specifically says this time Jura will kill Boruto, and that Boruto is their one piece that they cannot afford to lose. And the angry look in Boruto's eyes, it makes it clear Boruto is struggling with what he's being told, whereas Kashin Koji is willing to sacrifice everyone Boruto cares for outside of what appears to be Boruto's own life and Himawari. Boruto cannot make that coldly logical decision, and it's only another layer of tension that's growing between these two. Meanwhile, back in Konoha, we have Jura shopping for books, and when Konoha alerts Shikamaru to what's going on, he tells everyone to stand down and leave Jura alone, and my guy Jura just drops a whole band down on the counter for the clerk to use in advance for the next time he comes in and buy more books, which is someone who prefers reading books in physical format. Jura is definitely my spiritual animal. The only question is, where did Jura get all this money from, let alone an entire band? If Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Volume 5 does not give us a bonus page of a short chapter of Jura working odd jobs to get money to buy books, I'm gonna feel cheated. We then end off the chapter with Kawaki walking up behind Amado, removing the cigarette from his mouth, so disrespectful, and slamming him against the wall, demanding that Amado remove his limiters, specifically saying that he wants his power removed to the fullest extent. Whether or not Amado removes his limiters and gives Kawaki 100% access to Ishiki's offensive power, it does remain to be seen, since we won't know until the next chapter. But what you should take note of is the fact that Kawaki knows Jura is a threat to Naruto, and because of that, he's willing to use Otsutsuki power that he hates. Now, as we go into this next chapter, Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, Chapter 18, one thing that you should keep in mind is that Konohamaru and the others are learning the lesson that Ice Cube taught in 92. Don't trust a big butt and a smile. However, the other thing that we're also learning, jokes aside, is the fact that these characters are having to rely on deception in order to make up for their own lack of physical strength to compete with these awakened Shinju. And in the case of Sarada and Mitsuki, they're also having to rely on basic ninja tactics that are taught at the Ninja Academy. And yet, as we'll see, they're more than capable of fighting against Ryu. We open up the chapter with Sumire walking into Amado's lab with quite the scene unfolding right before her. Kawaki has Amado jacked up against the wall, and before she can get too far into scolding him, Kawaki basically tells her to shut up because he hasn't lost his temper yet, but he could always do so depending on how things play out with Amado. What we're seeing here through this entire exchange is the fact that Kawaki, despite him saying that he doesn't care about Amado, forcibly making him into a cyborg and replacing his naturally born human parts with ninja tech, we see that he is still, based on his actions, that he does care, and his reaction right now is completely in character for Kawaki. He is someone who associates power with control, and this entire conversation, particularly the early parts of it, it really showcases that. He was powerless back when Amado used to experiment on him, and he was powerless when he got Ishiki's coma seal placed onto him both times. The fact that he's now saying that when his body is modified is up to him, it's basically him saying that he's taking back control. That is something that survivors are taught from various different types of assault. They're told that in therapy to focus on taking back control and to not allow what happened in the past to dictate their future. And that's basically what we have here. It's subtle, but it's enough for us as the audience to be reminded that for everything Kawaki's been through, he is still a victim. But like victims in the real world, he's taking back control. But Kawaki, in this case, he is spiraling out of control as he does so. He tells Amado to remove his limiters on his body so that he can use 100% of Ishiki's power, and that if he doesn't, he'll kill him on the spot. That, my friends, is the first mistake that Kawaki's made, making a threat like that to Amado when he still needs him. It is a sign to Amado and to Sumire that while Kawaki can make a calculated decision to visit Amado, he's not thinking logically in that moment. How can you get your limiters removed when the only person who can remove them is dead because you killed them? All that blustering that Kawaki's doing, it's enough for Amado to pull the trigger by activating the shutdown code verbally. And he puts Kawaki to sleep just as he did Delta in part 1 of the story. This leads to Sumire calling out Amado for having a shutdown code on Kawaki, which is pretty huge news because it means that Class Rep and the others, they were not made aware of this during the time skip. Shikamaru spent the last 3 years believing that Boruto was the killer of Naruto, and the boy who Amado told him that he had implanted a shutdown code on. But Shikamaru never voiced that information when Konoha was hunting down Boruto, likely because only Amado could trigger it, and he was not going to allow Amado out of Konoha. But that also means that at no point during all of her conversations with Ada did Ada ever reveal the shutdown code to Class Rep either, which means that Amado just played his strongest hand here. He has no more elements of surprise to use, which means the next time Kawaki gets confrontational with Amado, he's going to know about that shutdown code. While Kawaki's body is being moved by Amado and Sumire, back in the land of Wind, on the outskirts of the hidden sand village, we have Sarada and Mitsuki trying to dispel Ryu's concerns about Yodo, who is unable to hide her emotions at the sight of Ryu. Sarada tries to tell Ryu that Yodo is only behaving in that way due to her personality, yet we see Sarada mentally worried about Yodo, and that's the narrative showing us that there's another truth that comes with dealing with these awakened Shinju, which is that the people that are tasked with taking them down are going to struggle as well, because it's basically them having to take down a loved one. It's different from, say, Edo Tensei, where the person looks exactly like they did when they were alive, even keeping their personality. The only real changes are the black eyes that they get and the cracks on the face. Whereas these awakened Shinju, they look different, enough so that even Sarada couldn't tell that Hidari was made out of Sasuke's chakra. But Yodo is proof that once someone knows the identity of the awakened Shinju, the human emotions, they kick in. We see this more with Matsuri as she's talking to Konohamaru, who is awkwardly carrying out his mission to rizz up Matsuri, and at this moment, he's nothing more than a moth flying into a flame. He knows that he shouldn't go any closer to it, but he just can't help himself. When Matsuri starts speaking of how comfortable she is when she's around Konohamaru, how it makes her realize who she is in so many words to paraphrase, she calls Konohamaru Konohamaru-chan, and that's what does it for our boy Konohamaru. He's basically melting now. So he gets this flashback of where he and Moegi were children and adults, and thinking back to the times that Moegi called him Konohamaru-chan, and the emotions are just kicking into gear for him. It's very subtle by Ikimoto, but this was a great way of showing how Konohamaru has begun to subconsciously associate Matsuri with Moegi, even though in his mind he knows that Matsuri is an enemy, a predator meant to kill him. But the flashback shows some of the more wavering of his heart, even if it's only for a moment. But as we see all too often in the Naruto world, it only takes a moment to take down even the most powerful of shinobi. Insert Madoru Uchiha for those of you guys who forget. While Konohamaru is trying to get his head back in the game, we have Ryu taking things into his own hands and spreading out the iron sand across the battlefield in an attempt to locate Boruto, but it ends up giving us more information about the iron sand that was not previously disclosed in the Naruto manga or in Boruto's manga. But apparently the iron sand gives the user the ability to sense locations and bloodlust of people as well, which is how Ryu immediately goes from looking for Boruto's location to calling out Yodo on her bloodlust. And after Yodo makes a weak attempt at downplaying how she's feeling by writing it off as, hey bruh, this is just my normal behavior, Mitsuki tries to divert the attention away from Ryu, focusing on Yodo, and he tries to strike up a conversation, and is smart to do so. What we're seeing here are the genes of Orochimaru at play. As a clone of Orochimaru, we expect Mitsuki to be intelligent, but what he did here is super underrated in that he was able to naturally shift the topic of conversation away from being centered on Ryu scoping out Yodo's bloodlust to refocusing Ryu's attention back to Boruto. It's a sign that at the very least, Mitsuki was someone who has remembered the key element of what it means to be a shinobi, which is deception at all costs, and he's trying to cover up the weaknesses that Yodo has displayed and her emotions getting in the way here. In short, it's teamwork. Ryu reveals that while he doesn't know for certain why he was ordered to kill Boruto, he just knows, hey, Jura told me he's got to go. And he thinks it's because Boruto knows too much about the Thorn Soul Bowl, as well as other things that he should not be privy to, which is why Jura said Boruto's got to get snuffed out. This leads to Sarada attempting to use Mitsuki's previous conversation with Ryu to lay her own trap for Ryu. The logic behind it is solid. It's basically her saying that, hey, Boruto's somebody that we're all trying to track down, so we should be working together. So she basically says, hey, if Boruto's after the Thorn Soul Bulb, then isn't there a way that we could use the Thorn Soul Bulb in order to lure him out of hiding, while also pretending like she doesn't know what the Thorn Soul Bulb truly is? It's a dangerous gamble, and you can see that the two Konoha shinobi, they're trying to follow their orders, which are to trick the awakened Shinji before betraying them. But through the small things like sensing Yodo's bloodlust and the over-eagerness to use the Thorn Soul Bulb and the emphasis on working together that Yodo, Sarada, and Mitsuki respectively in those examples have each tipped their hands to varying degrees, and Ryu's taking notice of. Meanwhile, back in Amado's lab, Sleeping Beauty, better known as Kawaki, is finally waking up. And as expected, Kawaki, he's not in a good mood, with Amado immediately trying to talk him down. What Amado's doing here is pretty crafty when you think about it, which goes back to what Ada said about him in Boruto Part 1, when Amado found himself at odds with Code. Amado has the silver tongue of a politician, but this time his words, they don't pan out as quickly as he would have hoped for them to do so. Amado quickly tries to establish a common ground to lower the temperature by saying Kawaki's right to view the awakened Shinji as being a threat to everyone, a threat that none of them ever saw coming. He even concedes that the only way to be able to fight them might be for Amado to give Kawaki what he's asking for, the full unleashed power of Ishiki that's inside of Kawaki. But there's a catch, as is often the case with Amado. Nothing ever truly that he does is for free. He's basically Doctor Strange coming to visit Dormammu from the first Doctor Strange movie, where he said, Dormammu, I'm coming to bargain. That's basically Amado and Kawaki here. What Amado wants in return for Kawaki is to place his coma seal on the new clone of his daughter Akubi. That basically goes back to Boruto Naruto Next Generation's chapter 75, where Amado revealed that he had a daughter who he tried to unsuccessfully clone, and thus he secretly implanted Kawaki a coma seal that contained the genetic data of his daughter. It's his final option, which I want to clear up a couple of big misconceptions. So people ask, why doesn't Amado just Edo Tensei his daughter? Edo Tensei requires a living sacrifice in order to be used, and his daughter would still be dead. That defeats the purpose of what he's trying to do. He wants her back to life in a living, breathing body. People also ask, why doesn't he have Orochimaru just clone his daughter? Orochimaru would not be able to change things because Orochimaru, for all of his genius, he's run into a similar issue. Mitsuki and his brother Log, they are both clones of Orochimaru. The smaller Shin clones that Orochimaru made, they are clones of the bigger Shin Uchiha. They don't have the same personalities. They're all different because each clone has its own soul. Every clone that Amado made, it looked like his daughter, it had her voice, and even had her memories, but all of them had the terrible personality of Delta, which Ada tells us in the manga is the exact opposite of Amado's daughter. This brings us back into the story itself. Amado is desperate, and he tells Kawaki that the resurrection of his daughter is the only thing that he truly has to live for at this point. He wants a guarantee that Kawaki will go through with planting the coma seal on his daughter first, and then he'll remove the limiters. However, the problem is that even after 3 years have passed since Kawaki was first propositioned this by Amado, the same thing is still happening. Kawaki's hate for Amado, it will not allow him to feel pity for someone like Amado, and he basically tells him to cut the sob story short because he's the one who's making the demands. He's the one in control. He counters Amado by making it known that he wants to make it perfectly clear that if he plants a coma seal onto Amado's daughter and she becomes an Otsuki, that Kawaki, he will kill her. And this is the story dropping another breadcrumb for something later occurring that goes wrong with the revival of Amado's daughter, because this is the second time that Kawaki's raised this concern of the coma seal making Amado's daughter into an Otsuki, which, given the number of times this has happened, this feels like a massive Chekhov's gun waiting to go off, which that term Chekhov's gun originates from the Russian writer named Anton Chekhov, who believed if you introduce something into a story, a gun sitting on a nightstand, for example, by the end of the story, it has to have been used in some way or else it serves no purpose. This is our second time of hearing Amado's daughter might become an Otsuki via the coma seal. So the smart money is that you start that countdown timer on Akibi being an Otsuki. You start that timer now. Amado hears this and he pushes back even harder for Kawaki to place the coma seal onto his daughter, basically saying, hey, I am willing to take that chance. And for the first time this entire encounter, Kawaki, he pauses and he makes a wise and a rational choice. Amado is too desperate. Someone like Amado, who's played 5D chess against Ishiki for years to set up a plan to kill Jigen, then kill Ishiki, and then trick Naruto and Shikamaru, also he can get to the point of using Kawaki to revive his daughter. The only time Amado has truly showed signs of becoming unraveled is with his daughter Akibi, and Kawaki knows that he has leverage here to do what it is that he wants, but also that Amado's blind spot to his daughter is either intentional, which that doesn't end well for anyone if someone like Amado is a villain, or it's something that Amado has overlooked, because this is the one area where Amado cannot be logical and he's only being emotional. Kawaki basically says in a very non-polite way that Amado can take all those long lists of conditions he has, he can shine them up real nice, he can turn them sideways, and he can shove them up his candy ass for all he cares, because he isn't reviving anyone who could be a potential enemy without being in possession of Ishiki's full power. Which translates into roughly, before I revive your daughter, I want to make sure I have enough power to kill her if it ever comes to that. And based on his history with Amado, Kawaki is justified to not really trust anything Amado's saying fully. Amado then tries to flip it back on to Kawaki by saying that he shouldn't be focused on getting Ishiki's full power, because in so many ways he already has Ishiki's power. He has Ishiki's full defensive capabilities, and the ninja tech in Kawaki's body, it gives him extreme regen abilities. He's as close to immortal as someone could ever hope to be. So what good would it be getting Ishiki's full attack power? The only thing that Kawaki's truly missing. It's very subtle, but he's trying to backdoor gaslight Kawaki into feeling bad about wanting Ishiki's full power, when Kawaki already has so much power at his disposal, and he lays it on even thicker by saying that if he releases the full attack power Ishiki, he has no way of even knowing if it will be enough for Kawaki to survive that battle with Jura, which means if Kawaki dies, Amado won't be able to revive his daughter. My friends, this is Amado Sanzu basically being in the running for #1 gaslighter, and I love how Kawaki sees this and basically gives 0 F's about it. He tells Amado that living or dying is irrelevant to him. The only thing that he wants is to ensure that Naruto has a safe world to return to when he unseals them. He's willing to become an unstoppable monster if that can happen. Also, he can kill all the Claw Grimes, the Awakened Shinju, kill Jura, kill Code, and then kill Boruto, since Boruto has Momoshiki inside of him. Kawaki says that once that is all done, he'll revive Amado's daughter, which is his way of saying, after I've taken out all the threats that I deem to be a threat to Naruto, I'll give your daughter this coma seal, and if she does end up becoming Notsuki, I'll have all the time in the world that I need to deal with her as my sole focus. The tension here, it is thick enough to cut, and I love it, because this is going to get messy as this entire arc is continuing to build on the themes of love and the various types of love that exist. Kawaki is a representation of obsessive and misunderstood love with Naruto that is driving Kawaki mad. Boruto is the love for one's loved ones. Hashin Koji is the love for one's sense of purpose, i.e. being a singularity of fate. Jura is the love of evolution and knowledge. Hidari represents the love of a father by having Sasuke's chakra. Matsuri is the love of a lover by having Moegi's chakra. Ryu is the love of a son by having Shinki's chakra. Mamushi having the love that comes from forced obsession with Ada. Sumire and Sarada in that Boruto love triangle, that's self-explanatory. Amado's love for his daughter, it borders on obsessive, just like Kawaki's love for Naruto is obsessive, and we're seeing in real time the story build on each of these concepts, but work it into the narrative into an organic way, which is leading to a very messy outcome for several of these characters, representative of our own lives as humans, where nothing truly ever goes according to plan. There are always variables that we do not account for. We then shift back to the Land of Wind, and Konohamaru tells Matsuri to not call him Konohamaru-chan because that's reserved for somebody else, which leads to Matsuri asking if it was Moegi who is allowed to call him that, and Matsuri's whole vibe shifts from this moment, and we see it in how she's acting towards Konohamaru, and she's not the only one who suddenly shifts. Ryu flips Sarada's suggestion on its head by showing off the Thorn Soul bulb, and this immediately gives him the confirmation about the intentions of the shinobi in the area. Araya and Yodo, they see the Thorn Soul bulb, and they cannot contain themselves in a way that does not give themselves over to Ryu by exposing themselves, and that's when Ryu knows for certain he's been played, and he reveals, hey, I already caught on to your plan a while back from now, which goes back to the intro. A ninja must see through deception, and ironically, Ryu saw through the deception that the shinobi are trying to use. Yodo is unable to move, and Mitsuki is shocked that Ryu was pretending to be naive when he knew the entire time what it was they're trying to do. And Ryu takes a step further by using his iron sand to take control of the bodies of those around him, and this is something that builds on what we've been told about Shinki in the manga before. Shinki was not just trained by Gaara, but he was also trained by Kankuro, a puppet master. In the drafts that Kishimoto made for the Boruto movie, Shinki was both an iron sand user as well as a puppet master, mixing both of those in simultaneously, and that's basically been carried over here, building on the very brief use of Puppet Master and Iron Sand combo that we saw in the manga version of the versus Momoshiki arc, where Shinki fought against Metal Lee in the second exam and he was using a Iron Sand puppet. This leads us to the benefit of Araya being on the battlefield, who also happens to be a puppet master, and we see why Hashin Koji wanted him on this team with Team 7. Araya is able to counter Ryu's attack by using the jutsu that he had meant to use in conjunction with Shinki, and we end this chapter off with the continuation of the battle being set up for the next chapter. One thing that I do love about this chapter is that it's a slow marching drum for future plot points. Not everything has to be super action focused. While we were focused on the setup for the battle in the Sand Village, we're also seeing Kawaki reveal how far he's willing to go into the darkness to get the things that he wants, which is Ishiki's full power, and he all but admits that he is aware he's becoming another Ishiki, but he doesn't view himself in the same light because his intentions are for Naruto's well-being, which ironically goes against the very things that Naruto as a character stood for. Kawaki idolized Naruto, yet his actions in the chapter prove that he doesn't truly understand Naruto Uzumaki, but we also get this setup for a darker turn with Amado's daughter being revealed as Notsuki, but it was buried in this chapter in a way where it wants you to ignore it so that it comes across as a shock later when it either goes a wrong way where she doesn't become Notsuki, which would subvert expectations because it ends up being something even worse than that, or it will end up feeling like a gut punch when she is revealed to be an Otsutsuki. With Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 19, things have taken a turn for the worse, and if you're a fan of Konohamaru Sarutobi, it looks like that Sarutobi Riz God gene is skipped a generation, and as a result, it's going to get the guy killed now that Matsuri has realized he isn't in love with her, and this whole time she was nothing more than a sidekick and that Moegi was the real wifey. And as this is going on, Kashin Koji is sitting on the sideline going, this is a necessary sacrifice, and hopefully Konohamaru has some good life insurance policy as a Konoha shinobi. So we open up with a flashback that's explaining the origins of Areya's Magna Release Jutsu sword and why it's so effective against Ryu. In short, the sword was made up of the chakra that belonged to Shinki, who used chakra control to imbue the sword with his own chakra for the purposes of combining Areya's wind release sword attacks with Shinki's chakra to allow him to use the Iron Sand on a comparable level as Shinki, which is pretty brilliant when you think about it in terms of what he's doing here. Shinki is shoring up the weaknesses of a comrade while also sharing his own power in the process. We also see a bit of a complex nature to their relationship in terms of more context, just like we saw with previously Areya and Yodo having that sibling-like relationship of bickering back and forth. Shinki and Areya, they have more of a healthy rivalry, with Shinki saying, think of him sharing his power with Areya like him giving himself a handicap whenever they spar with one another. The reason for this is basically to ensure they become capable enough shinobi to fight alongside Gaara, the Kazekage. But what's interesting here is that this close-knit group that Gaara took under his wing, they have more of a complex dynamic than we might have originally thought. So Areya tells Shinki that he should start paying more attention to Yodo, who just a few chapters ago asked Sarada if she had changed her look for a boy who Sarada liked, and now we see a flashback of Yodo being watched by Shinki and Areya from afar. She's got her hair let down, she's drawn in a feminine way, with both of them basically speaking about her, this time with Shinki pretty much saying that Areya has feelings for Yodo as well. Between the subtle hints that Yodo likes Shinki and Shinki's silence when he's watching Yodo, and Shinki calling out Areya on always talking about Yodo, and Areya having the constant bickering with Yodo, the prospect of there being unresolved feelings amongst this group is being sprinkled into the story. Very fitting, given one of the sub themes of this arc is about the nature of love itself and the way that it affects people in terms of their rationality, which that's going to be important to keep in mind as we go further into this chapter and the chapters ahead. So this brings us back to the present day, where Areya is battling against Ryu, this time by swinging his sword to release Mitsuki from the control of Ryu's Iron Sand, showing that the main power of the sword is indeed to serve as a counter to the Iron Sand attacks, making it a great equalizer against such a powerful enemy who was able to bully Base Code a few chapters ago, holding him hostage like he was a Disney princess waiting to be rescued. However, what you should be seeing here is that due to this matchup, they are having to rely way too much on that Iron Release Sand Sword, and one of the things that we learn in Naruto's manga is that you should never use your primary jutsu too much against an opponent, because they will eventually find a weakness to it or a way to counter it, and this sword is well on the path to fall on that fate. It's no different. Ryu has already begun to start clocking the powers of the sword, and he's starting to come up with countermeasures in real time to test it out. So the strategy that the team comes up with is to have Sarada and Mitsuki do all the heavy lifting in battle, which makes sense. They are the strongest out of that group, and Areya will provide support by taking care of the Iron Sand with the sword. And it goes unspoken that Yodo, her support role is to listen in with her highly sensitive ears, which can hear things down to the beating of the heart in order to alert them if there are any surprise attacks. This leads to Ryu mocking the plan that they have, saying that the group of shinobi, they are making a mistake by underestimating him. And as we all know, as Battle Shonen fans, anytime a villain's talking like this, they're definitely backing it up. And before they can react, he blasts off a huge barrage of Iron Sand and attempts to swarm them from a distance with the attack, but Areya's sword is able to cut through the attack and dispel dispel the Iron Sand with ease, and this is where Boruto's manga starts taking us back in time to the traditional Naruto fighting method of the move hidden behind the move. Unlike Naruto, where characters would stop mid-fight and explain everything you just saw step by step, Boruto just expects you as a reader to be able to catch what's going on without explanation, because this is a sequel to said series. So Ryu's first attack was merely a distraction, meant to confirm the extent of how much volume Araya's sword could dispel, since the initial attack had more sand than the prior attacks, and while Araya dealt with the frontal attack, Ryu had secretly placed a secondary Iron Sand attack to come up from Araya's blind spot, but Yodo quickly alerts him to it in a seamless display of effective teamwork. This allows Ryu to confirm Yodo's abilities and her aptitude as a support shinobi, while Sarada and Mitsuki, they start trying to take advantage of Ryu's attention being on the two sand shinobi, but this, my friends, is where the damage has already been done. In only a few moves, Ryu gained critical intel and figured out the extent of the abilities of the two ninjas who are playing the support, or rather got a good grasp on their abilities. He's able to gauge how fast Araya can react to his attacks, how much Iron Sand he can cancel at one time, and he knows the accuracy of Yodo's abilities. Whether or not they're hiding anything else, he doesn't know right now, but he now has enough information to proceed in the way he needs to. The only thing that he doesn't truly know right now are the combat capabilities of the two Konoha shinobi, which means he still has the advantage because he gained a lot of critical intel without having to show his full power. Now, Sarada and Mitsuki, they now show that these Sand siblings, they aren't the only ones who have good teamwork. Sarada shoots off a massive fireball jutsu at Ryu, who easily blocks it with his own Iron Sand, but they give Ryu a taste of his own medicine. Just as he set up a trap for Araya, Sarada and Mitsuki, they have set one up too, by having Mitsuki's snakes rise up from the ground to catch him off guard and ensnare Ryu, who was too focused on blocking himself from that high volume fire release jutsu that Sarada used. Realizing how dire the situation is and how good of a chance they have to get the upper hand, Mitsuki starts the fight out by using Sage Mode and continues to use the element of surprise by striking Ryu, who's being held in place by a second set of Sage Mode Shadow Snakes that are hitting. But Ryu basically breaks his entire body apart as Iron Sand, and he escapes the attack. And somewhere the I miss when this story is about ninjas doing ninja trickery crowd, they look like idiots. So the group quickly reforms by standing in a cross pattern, and they take in the information that they have. Now knowing that Ryu can break his body apart and become one with the Iron Sand, and Yodo, using those ears of hers, she's able to quickly pinpoint its location by listening to the sounds of the Iron Sand grinding together as Ryu is beginning to reform, which makes her every bit as valuable to this team as Araya. And we start seeing why Kashin Koji specifically had Shikamaru assemble this team. They're learning to support each other in real time quickly. All of them have the right skill set that is working. Araya is taking this information and he uses the Iron Sand blade to force Ryu's body to reform itself and take away the element of surprise. And by doing so, he reveals to Ryu that this sword doesn't just cancel out Iron Sand, but it can gather it too, making it both a offensive and defensive attack. Now Mitsuki wastes no time and he sees the target reforming and he shoots off another set of those Sage Mode energy snakes at Ryu, this time tearing into his body at multiple points and inflicting damage onto Ryu. But Mitsuki's attack, for as much damage as it did, it wasn't enough to fully take down Ryu, who starts breaking apart into Iron Sand again and attempts to go back into hiding. But this short exchange does give the Mitsuki fans something to wave their pom-poms about, because this upscales Mitsuki and it keeps him in line with what we previously saw when he fought Boruto, which is that Mitsuki was relative to a suppressed base Boruto, enough to make Boruto fight in a defensive manner, use jutsu in a defensive way, but he wasn't going at full power either. So not to be outdone, Sarada, she cuts on her 3-tomo Sharingan and she rushes forward with the Chidori and she blitzes Ryu as he starts to reform and she jabs him in the side with her attack. Now this is really smart when you remember one crucial thing that we saw in the Boruto anime version of the Versus Momoshiki arc, which is that Mitsuki's lightning release attack, it was briefly effective against Shinki's Iron Sand. Boruto's own lightning release was able to crack Shinki's Iron Sand, and when Boruto cheated by using purple lightning, he was able to generate enough of a volume of lightning release to outright break the Iron Sand altogether. Sarada is basically attempting to do the same thing with her Chidori. Since they saw Mitsuki's attacks, they didn't have enough weight to them to damage Ryu to the extent that they needed. So using Chidori's speed amp and the high volume of lightning release chakra for the thrusting jab is a smart idea here. We then shift over to Konohamaru and Matsuri, and this whole scene, it is overly emotional and it is childish, but it's good. And it's intentional to reflect one of the themes of this arc, which is love. If you look at the cut of Matsuri's clothes, in particular on her back, is shaped in a heart-shaped pattern. That's intentional and that's poetic. Now that we see her in this jealous rage of Konohamaru, Matsuri is losing it. She's cussing out Moegi for being the woman that Konohamaru loves, calling her a bitch and using another word to describe her that I can't say on YouTube because it'll get the video age restricted, but it starts with the letter S, and the chapter review editor should have it on the screen so you can see what I can't verbally say. So we then see the nature of their relationship spiraling even further as Matsuri becomes even more unhinged as she begins choking Konohamaru with the wood wrapped around his neck and cutting off his air. She's no longer calling him Konohamaru-chan, and she's referring to him not in the way of endearment like before, but solely by his last name, which shows that she is detaching herself emotionally from Konohamaru by not using the endearment phrase that is placed with his first name. If you know anything about Japanese culture, you know what I'm getting at here. So as this is going on, Ada watches everything with her Senrigan, and she's got those long legs of hers crossed, saying that Konohamaru is a dummy and how he fumbled this whole situation and his mission that Shikamaru gave him to exploit the feelings of love that Moegi has for Konohamaru that are fueling Matsuri and her action. Ada correctly deduces that what Matsuri wants isn't just to call Konohamaru by the name Konohamaru-chan. She wants the symbolism and the relationship that comes from it. Basically, Shikamaru understood that, and he thought that Konohamaru understood it. He expected Konohamaru to use some riz to make Matsuri fall for him and lead her along to a point where she would have her guard lowered by his immaculate riz, and then he could shove a Rasengan in her back. But obviously, that plan, it backfired, and Ada has a front row seat to all of this, and she informs Kashin Koji of what's going on. Ada tells them that Konohamaru is likely to get killed, but as she's speaking, Boruto quickly demands to know how is Sarada doing against Ryu, and based on what Ada is saying, the fight, it is close enough that she cannot determine who's going to win right now, which is also her saying that the fight is close enough that they can't go help Konohamaru, and this leads to Boruto being stopped by Kashin Koji when Boruto tries to head to the battlefield, with the unspoken reminder that Boruto can't act because if he does, Jura will show up on the battlefield and he'll kill him. It's basically the narrative forcing Boruto to sit on the sideline and allow his friends to show how much they've grown after 3 years of training. Now, for Boruto's character, this is a very important and I feel like underappreciated lesson by the fandom. So he's lost so much due to omnipotence, so it makes sense why he wants to protect those he cares for. But sometimes the best way to protect those that you love is to give them room to grow and not smother them. He filled his promise to Sasuke to look after Sarada by coming in when Code attacked the village, and then to save her when she was caught off guard by Hidari's lightning release attack and immobilized. Now, this is the time for her and Mitsuki to show the fruits of their training, which is what they're doing. At the end of part 1, right before Ada showed up in the village, they talked about how they wanted to be strong enough to assist Boruto get to an Otsutsuki level, and the only way they could do that is through the training they underwent, and they have to prove themselves right now to Boruto, who's being forced to watch all this. Boruto trusted in Sarada's power enough to have her buy time against Hidari and all those claw grinds when he was charging up his Rasengan Uzuhiko, but Boruto's also there on the battlefield. He's not there right now, and Boruto's learning a crucial element of teamwork is learning to trust in your teammates to take care of themselves. We then shift over to Jura meeting with Bug and Hidari, and this whole conversation has so many layers to it. So each of them are by the cube that they use to transport themselves, and it is a sign that Kashin Koji's right. Had Boruto gone there, Jura would have been there on the battlefield within moments because of the cube. Jura's conversation is also a fascinating one because we see the knowledge he's gained from reading all these books and interacting with humans. We see him sharing this knowledge with Bug and Hidari because part of the arc for these awakened Shinju, particularly the ones who are made up of human chakra, so all of them except for Jura, is understanding what it means to be human and the meaning behind the type of love that each of them represents. And Jura has to put all these pieces together. He says that they should follow their instincts and focus on evolution because human beings aren't able to fully achieve their true evolution because there are drawbacks to them being in a society and forming bonds, and those bonds make them more aware of their own mortality as humans, because as a human you only live for a certain number of years. At some point we all die. Upon hearing this, Bug, he's completely checked out. He's like, man, this don't apply to me. I'm not a human. What do I care for? But the fact that Jura is saying this information to him means that it does. He's telling Bug that even though awakened Shinju, they run the risk of having the same weakness that humans have because they possess intelligence. The weakness of love in particular is what he's worried about. And as he's saying this, we see a shot of Hidari, who is made up of the chakra of Sasuke Uchiha, who is the father of Sarada Uchiha, a father who loves his daughter. Do with that information what you will, but you guys know my stance on the Sarada, Hidari, and Sasuke plot thread. I've done a video on that. We then shift back over to Matsuri reflecting Jura's warning that feelings of love can affect the Shinju as well, with her saying that Konohamaru and the feelings that she has for him, they're driving her insane, taking the phrase crazy in love to a whole new level, and she begins to start drawing herself in closer to Konohamaru, looking deep into his eyes, saying that she plans to eat him. Jura then tells the story of how he saw these feelings of love in the Ino Shikachou trio. Their love for Himawari as a comrade, it overrode their own survival instincts. They chose to protect her despite knowing they're facing an apex predator. And he singles out Inojin, losing himself in his desire to protect Himawari, and Jura can't fully understand what drove them to do that, which is why he's been reading so many books where he's seen repeatedly in multiple stories that humans, they don't act rationally when matters of the heart are in play. We saw that with Hinata saving Naruto, for example, and he can't fully understand it. What he does know is that they need to conquer these feelings inside of them as awakened Shinju when they do pop up, and that further builds on the foreshadowing that the yin release chakra of all the people who were bitten by the claw grimes and got made into awakened Shinju is going to be important, since yin release chakra is spiritual energy of a shinobi, and spiritual energy is tied to the heart, where feelings like love and anger reside. And we see that in how it's affecting Matsuri in real time. And this is where the brilliance of this whole exchange really comes into play, but you got to go deeper beneath the surface to appreciate it. So it makes sense when you remember that Naruto and Boruto are heavily inspired by Buddhism, in particular the powers of the characters, and in this case the values that the characters hold. Jura is basically teaching the concept that shinobi and their attachments, in this case attachments in the form of bonds with comrades and lovers, and the attachments that shinobi have when it comes to feelings of love, it keeps them stuck into the suffered cycle of samsara, which is where all the 6 past powers and all the powers that came from Kaguya, which went to Hagoromo, which Hagoromo shared chakra with humans, that's where all that stuff is rooted in. And that is what is preventing these shinobi from being able to reach enlightenment, which is evolution as Jura calls it. And it's poetic that Jura is the one who is saying all this information, since Ishiki's karma seal is what code used to make the awakened Shinju, and Ishiki possesses the eye patterned after the Dharma wheel, which is associated with transcending beyond samsara, in this case transcending beyond Kaguya, the mother of chakra on earth. However, getting back to the story, Matsuri isn't the only one being affected. So too are the human shinobi. They're stuck in that cycle as well. We're seeing it on display in a full circle moment that brings us back to the very start of the chapter and the feelings that Araya may or may not have for Yodo, the feelings of camaraderie that Jura said was a weakness of humans. We see them standing in a similar cross-shaped formation, looking around for Ryu, meaning that during this whole time they still haven't been able to land a lasting blow on Ryu, and Araya is preparing his sword to force him to reform in the sky above him, but Ryu is one step ahead of them, and as he's reforming, he's producing the claw grimes from his body, in particular the clothing on his body that's made up from Code's claw marks. Several claw grimes, they start falling from the sky, continuing the same trend that we saw from before, where it's the move hidden behind the move. Ryu is now starting to use the element of surprise and the numbers advantage, and the claw grimes hacks to his advantage. So Sarada and Mitsuki, their attacks, while they haven't been strong enough to stop him from reforming, they are strong enough to force him to use these methods of regenerating and hiding, meaning there is some form of relativity there. But the claw grimes, their main hacks that he's using comes from the fact that they have such a low win condition, whereas Sarada and Mitsuki have such a high win condition. Whereas all the shinobi have to completely destroy the claw grinds. All the claw grinds need to do is firmly bite into the shinobi and they win, which means the whole nature of this battle, it just changed from, say, moderate difficulty to god mode difficulty. Mitsuki, he then launches forward with several sage mode snakes to attack from a distance, and Sarada starts shooting off the fire style phoenix flower jutsu to take out more of the claw grinds from the sky. Both Sarada and Mitsuki are quickly realizing the importance of trimming down the number of claw grinds before they can land on the ground, because this is a battle where distance and close quarters, high-powered strikes will be their best friend, because if they get too close for too long, they'll be bitten by the claw grinds. However, Ryu, he just keeps spamming more of these claw grinds to the point where it's impossible to take them all down from a distance, and just when one of them begins to start biting Yodo, Araya swoops in to attack it from behind before it can firmly lock on and begin the tree conversion process like we saw in the past with the other shinobi. It's only in the process of biting her, but it hasn't firmly locked its teeth into her. However, what you should be paying attention to with this scene is that it's a difference in swordsmanship skills that are on display right now. Boruto is the better swordsman, and it's being shown right now. A master swordsman can cut through paper with one swing, and they can also, with the same swing, have enough skill to not cut through paper on the next swipe. Boruto easily cut through the claw grinds in chapter 2 with targeted sword slices without having any type of an amp. Yet Araya, whose sword is charged with Shinki's chakra, isn't able to fully cut through the claw grind that is biting into Yodo's body, but it does just enough to force the claw grind to stop biting Yodo and release her. And in the confusion, Ryu swoops in to take hold of the claw grind that has Araya's sword stuck inside of it. By forcing the claw grind that has the sword into the shoulder to retreat into the claw mark of another claw grind, Ryu has now taken the equalizer out of the equation. That magnet release sword that was giving Ryu so many problems is now gone, and Yodo, who could hear him being reformed, is now suddenly being surrounded by all the noise of the battlefield, and she is now injured. Ryu has basically removed two of the more troublesome pieces on the table, or at the very least, he's slowing them down. An act of love by Araya to save his comrade and potential crush in Yodo just cost them their greatest tool to keep the playing field even against Ryu, because he can now seemingly use his hacks in an unrestrained manner to take control of their bodies, in particular Mitsuki and Sarada. We then end the chapter off with Matsuri telling Konohamaru it is time for them to merge together, and unfortunately for him, the type of merging that she's got in mind, it isn't the type that answers the question of whether or not backshots being given to Matsuri will result in Konohamaru getting a splinter downstairs. She's going full-blown alien on Konohamaru, and she's about to devour him whole based on how this chapter's ended off. The beauty of what we're seeing right here is that Konohamaru is learning that when you play with human emotions, and these Shinju are made from human chakra, which means that they are very much human in a lot of ways. When you play with those emotions, things can backfire rather quickly. Boruto 2 Blue Vortex proves the expression that good things come to those who wait to be absolutely correct, because Sarada Uchiha has finally been forced to use her Mangekyou Sharingan, and as you expect from someone who says she wanted to be strong enough to fight against Otsutsuki level threats, this power is absolutely broken enough to allow her to do so, and we'll touch on that later. But there was no better first opponent to use this power on than Ryu, given the theme of the arc that we're in of itself, which is exploring the complexities of the human heart, and the Mangekyou Sharingan are the eyes that reflect the heart. So we open up the chapter with Konohamaru's life basically flashing before his eyes, and realizing that if he doesn't think too quickly on his feet, he's gonna end up meeting his Uncle Asuma in Ninja Heaven and die before he ever gets the chance to be Hokage and pay off his promise to Naruto in chapter 2 of Naruto, where they agreed to one day fight each other for the Hokage title. And he's now progressed to a point where he is coughing up blood, and Konohamaru, being the quick thinker that he is, he switches from victim to Riz God. When Matsuri ponders if she should break his neck to make him shut up or let him talk while she slowly eats him alive, Konohamaru lays it on thick with her. He reminds her that talking to him was supposed to have been the best day of her life, and if she gets rid of him, then they won't be able to talk ever again. And as she's doing this, we see Matsuri conflicted by the expression on her eyes as she's watching Konohamaru's entire head get crushed in. What we're seeing here is what Konohamaru was told by Shikamaru: play off the inexperience of these Shinji. Konohamaru is maintaining eye contact while she's talking through her emotions, all while we get that brutal shot of how the wood release is being used by Matsuri as his blood is dripping onto it as it is crushing into Konohamaru's spine and the back of his head, while simultaneously pulling him closer towards her to the point that they're almost face to face. And it's at this moment we start to get an idea of what truly being devoured by Shinji means. Matsuri intended to literally eat him, which that is a terrible way to go. The only thing saving him is Matsuri is conflicted about eating him. One side of her wants to keep him alive and the other side just wants him dead. However, this cold nature approach by Konohamaru as he embraces Shikamaru's mission plan to trick Matsuri into lowering her guard so he can kill her, it does come at a price, which we'll see later on, where Konohamaru Sarutobi, the shinobi, ends up clashing against Konohamaru Sarutobi, the human being, and we see the downsides of Konohamaru having been part of Naruto's generation. Meanwhile, the battle against Ryu, it continues to rage on, and to say that things are looking a bit bleak, that's an understatement. The team of Sarada, Araya, and Yodo and Mitsuki, they have lost the Magna Release sword, which means that they're technically at Ryu's mercy as he uses that jutsu that belongs to Shinki, and he knows he has them. Araya's wind release jutsu, it proves to be ineffective. He goes down immediately, as does Mitsuki's Sage Mode's attack, though Mitsuki does put up a valiant effort after Araya is cut in the side by one of Ryu's attacks. However, just when it looks like Mitsuki is beginning to pressure Ryu, we see a coldly calculated move. Ryu uses his Iron Sand to grab Araya's body and use it as a human shield against Mitsuki's Sage Mode snakes, knowing that Mitsuki will be unable to strike through a comrade, and Ryu takes that moment to use this against Mitsuki by hitting him so hard he's knocked out of Sage Mode, he's coughing up blood, and now Ryu has taken control of Araya and Mitsuki's bodies, and he's now openly mocking Sarada and Yodo by stating checkmate, and it's a brilliantly calculated move. The two remaining shinobi are from the Sand Village and the Leaf Village, and he has a hostage that's close to each of them, which is why he's trying to use their safety as leverage to gain intel on Boruto. From allies to weaknesses, anything of use, claiming I'll let you guys live if you comply with my demands. This, my friends, is why I say that Ryu is the second most dangerous Shinju behind Jura, despite being the youngest out the entire group. This entire encounter, he's adapted in real time, and he's made backup strategies to his backup strategies as he gets new intel. He's smart enough to throw shade at Mitsuki while he's also containing his bloodlust. When Mitsuki says don't trust him, he'll kill us anyway, Ryu replies, hey, I'm nothing like you Konoha shinobi. I wouldn't do such a thing. However, Ryu understands that he's the one that has all the leverage here, and he's using it, and it's just another thing in the long list of accomplishments that show his IQ. He was smart enough to trick the shinobi into revealing their true intentions, basically deceiving them when they're trying to deceive him. He was able to adjust when Araya used that Magna Release sword by setting up a multi-step plan to summon the Claw Grimes and use them to take away the Iron Sword before getting rid of them off screen. Now he's taken hostages, one from each team, in order to apply pressure to get them to meet his demands, and Yodo realizes they've been beaten, and so Yodo turns snitch. She can't even look Sarada in the eyes at first, but she begs her. She says, tell him where Boruto is, because otherwise we'll be killed. Before you harp on Yodo, I do want to say it's a human reaction here for Yodo to have that fear for her life and for Araya's life, but what we're also seeing here is a wise decision by Kishimoto and Ikimoto to begin the build-up for the reveal of Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan, because Yodo's suggestion was needed to get Sarada deep into her emotions, which in turn starts serving as a bridge to her using Mangekyou, and the Mangekyou, again, are the eyes that reflect the heart. As Sarada states that she would never turn on a comrade, she recalls Sumire's words back during the drama that came from the fight regarding her hugging Boruto, something that if we go all the way back to chapter 17, it was still something very clear on Sarada's mind that she was thinking about the hug and Sumire's accusations, but now, as she's being pressured for more information, her mind has shifted to the other part of the conversation and the light bulb goes off for her. Sumire said they support Boruto, but they oddly know nothing about him, and it's because they know nothing that they're allowed to live the way that they have. Boruto's silence was to prevent a situation exactly like this. Sarada can't give up any information about Boruto that she doesn't have, and now we start to see a delayed payoff for that whole love triangle scene. Sumire was right in that they had to keep their distance from Boruto Boruto to honor his wishes, but Sarada was also right in that they have a duty to support him in battle as well, because Boruto can't do this alone. This hits even harder when you realize this all goes back to Boruto Naruto Next Generation's chapter 80. Sarada broke down when she realized that Boruto was having to carry this burden alone, and she wanted to help him, but she was unable to do so. Now she wants to help, and she can help, but her way of helping is for her right now to embrace her own ignorance about any concrete information pertaining to Boruto. And as she thinks this over, her heart, it is struggling. Yodo, someone who has super sensitive ears, can hear the smallest details from the breathing patterns of someone down to the beating of their heart, making her a human lie detector. Yodo knows this truth by using her power, which up until this point in the time has never been shown in the manga to this detail. The part about her being able to hear the heartbeats of a person, that was anime only until now. Yodo tells Sarada, I used to wonder how you could stick up for a rogue ninja who killed your Kage, but now I understand. He's the person for you, who you want to stand in his corner even when the rest of the world wants him dead. She says that while that person is Boruto for Sarada, that person for her is Shinki, which is another payoff to some of the slower stuff we had earlier in chapter 16, like Yodo asking Sarada, was she changing her look? Was she changing her vibe for a guy? Now Yodo is putting all these pieces together. It's also worth noting that Yodo saying that she had questions about how Sarada could support someone like Boruto, someone who killed the Hokage, killed the Hokage's wife, tried to kill their son, and is being hunted down by the Five Nations, including Gaara, who was personally leading a manhunt for Boruto before getting defeated by Matsuri. However, it's after hearing Sarada's heart that she realizes she would have done the same thing for Shinki that Sarada's doing for Boruto, which naturally, all of this girl talk, it bores Ryu, and he demands to know, are you complying with me, or do I have to kill you all? This is where Yodo goes from wanting Sarada to snitch to now knowing the truth. She seemingly tries to spare Sarada that pain by offering up herself. She tells Ryu, use me instead, saying that they have zero information about Boruto, but with her sensory jutsu, she should be able to help Ryu by finding Boruto. And honestly, on the surface level, it's not a bad offer for Ryu. We've seen how well her sensory skills work, and they did do a good enough job when working with Gaara in that flashback that they found Boruto and Kashin Koji's hideout, just not the specific area of Orochimaru's underground cave they were in, but they got close. And Ryu isn't dumb. If he takes her up on that offer, he's basically transferring the leverage that he has to now her instead. Right now, he can kill her at any point, but if he takes her up on this offer, then she's not expendable, because he needs her to find Boruto, and he has no way of knowing whether or not she's lying, which is not the position you want to be in, which means Ryu has to think things over. And as he's weighing his options, you can tell he's coming to the conclusion, I don't really need you, because Matsuri, as she says in chapter 16, she's able to hear what the roots underground in the desert are able to see. Matsuri has a way to detect Boruto. Meanwhile, on the other side of the desert, upon seeing Konohamaru's spine and skull being crushed in the process, Matsuri has now been moved to tears. For the first time in her life, she is crying. And Konohamaru, he takes it as a teaching moment, telling her that what she is feeling is a sign that she doesn't truly want to kill him. Is Konohamaru trying to take the inexperience of Matsuri to make her give him an opening so he can kill her? But this is also where we get something interesting. Back in the Ten Tails dimension, Hidari is watching closely with confusion as Jura starts crying himself, which brings up another question that we can only speculate on. But we have to ask, does Jura now have a connection with the other Shinju in a way that is similar to Jinwoo from Solo Leveling, where he can sense the emotions of his shadow soldiers and see through them in real time? For now, we have to wait and see because we don't have an answer. Meanwhile, Konohamaru is now closer to Matsuri than ever before, so he tells her to grab hold of his hands, saying that holding hands is how a relationship starts. And as tears continue to fall, he does the same thing that Shikamaru wanted him to, which is to gain Matsuri's trust, then betray her. In the blink of an eye, Konohamaru forms two giant Rasengans, which destroy Matsuri's arms, and before she realizes what happened, he takes advantage of her being off guard and slams both giant Rasengans into her so hard that Kendrick Lamar somewhere is singing a minor while playing hopscotch in the background due to how big the balls being pushed inside of Matsuri were. Yet with what were supposed to be her last words, Matsuri says the name Konohamaru-chan, and that's where we see how Konohamaru fumbled. Jura reveals that Matsuri hesitated to kill Konohamaru because of love, but Konohamaru pulled off the killing intent from his attack out of love as well. And it goes back to hearing the words Konohamaru-chan and how one of the themes of this entire arc has been exploring humanity and the complexity of the human heart, which is crucial to remember when you realize what one half of chakra is for Naruto characters. Yin chakra, spiritual energy, which comes from the mind but also the heart, which is why Konohamaru, when his heart faltered, his jutsu lost some bite to it. Matsuri survived this attack with only her head and part of her chest left, and so she tries to finish off Konohamaru with another wood release, but I want to take the time to say something that I think is important. What we're seeing here is the downside to Konohamaru having been from Naruto's generation, because he suffers from being on the back end of that generation. He was in the generation that fought against the Akatsuki and had to deal with morally gray characters like Danzo, Kabuto, Orochimaru, yet he was too young to participate in any of those battles. And by the time he did come of age, he was too young to go fight in the war. And even with things like the Land of Silence that took place after the 4th Ninja War, so those would be those Shikamaru episodes from Naruto Shippuden 489 to 493, he was also too young and inexperienced to get involved in anything that complicated, and now it is biting him here. It's only 2 words, Konohamaru-chan, but those words were enough to bring back the feelings that he has for Moegi, which it impacted his attack on Matsuri. Sai, he could have done this. Ino could have done this. Sasuke and Shikamaru damn sure could have done this, but those are all people who directly had to deal with the gray area that exists in the shinobi world, where things aren't necessarily black and white. They can operate in that area where it requires blocking off the emotions of the heart, and sadly, he's not the only one who learns this. So too do Yodo and Sarada, but this is the final vehicle needed for us to see the Mangekyou show itself, which again, those are the eyes that reflect the heart. All of this is connected, so just bear with me. Ryu shoves his iron sand deep inside of Yodo to the point it penetrates her body and exits out of her back. And as Sarada goes to check on her, Ryu coldly watches as Sarada begins to panic as Yodo accepts her fate. She's dying, which, given the type of wound that she has, barring some emergency medical treatment, she will die. Yet before Sarada can do anything, Ryu takes control of her body. Now, as Yodo is bleeding out, she tells Sarada she knows it's over for her, but she decides to make her time count as Ryu begins to savagely count down from 4 to 3, signaling the number of shinobi he still has to kill. This leads to Yodo telling Sarada, listen to the words that she's about to say. She's basically telling Sarada that she knows she's holding back her true power, and she calls her out on it. She tells her that it's because Sarada doesn't understand her own feelings, and she asks her to think about who it is that Sarada wanted to gain power for, who it is that she wants to be strong for, that she knows the answer, which is why she knows that Sarada is confused about her feelings. But she's trying to deceive herself subconsciously into believing her feelings are everything except for what she knows deep down inside they are. And this, my friends, this does a lot of things. This is long-term storytelling in effect. The first thing it does is it gives us a payoff for what we got at the end of Boruto Part 1, specifically in Boruto Chapter 69, where Sarada gets pissed off that she's left behind when Boruto went to go fight Code, and she vows to get strong enough to stand alongside Boruto to fight Otsutsuki level threats. During that chapter, Sarada states she wants to help Boruto so much that she's mad at herself, and Mitsuki asks, is it because you like Boruto? And Sarada dodges that answer, which leads to him basically saying the same thing that Yodo did, which is that both of them believe that Sarada doesn't understand her true feelings. Then in chapter 78, Sarada basically loses it emotionally when she learns that Kawaki killed Boruto before and he's trying to kill him again. This time she leaves with the intention to save Boruto, and we know via Kashin Koji's 10 directions in the reveal in chapter 13 of Two Blue Vortex, Sarada's actions did save Boruto's life, even if it gave Boruto the scar over his eye, because Had she arrived a moment too late and never shot that fireball jutsu, the order of events would have been as follows according to Kashinkoji. Kawaki kills Boruto and then Sarada gets killed afterwards. They die side by side. We're getting more payoff to all of that, as well as her initial Mangekyou Sharingan awakening, where the trauma and despair that came from learning Naruto was dead, hearing that Boruto was being blamed for it, breaking down at the thought of her father, killing an innocent Boruto being someone who idolizes her father. This led to her Mangekyou awakening and showing itself. Once again, it's playing into Yodo's words about Sarada seeking power for one person in particular. That person is Boruto, even if she hasn't fully realized it herself. This also pays off what Ikimoto himself revealed in 2024 regarding Sarada's time skip design. The day that Boruto became a rogue ninja, she purposely went to the store that Boruto shops at to buy the same brand jacket that he wears. The colors, they are red and black, picked specifically because of the proximity that red has to pink on the color wheel. Boruto wore a black jacket with pink and Sarada wears a black jacket with red. It was her way of never forgetting Boruto and reminding people about Boruto, even the haircut itself. She sought powerful love. Whether you want to call it romantic, platonic, I'm not going to get into that. But regardless as to what shipping side you're on, love fueled her actions for the power of the Mangekyou awakening. And it's now being used for the first time that we see a jutsu being used in combat. But in order to bring that out for Sarada to use it, Yodo has to make one final push to her. She tells her she knows Sarada is holding back and that it's okay if Sarada only wants to use that power of hers, which we know is the Mangekyou, for one person, that one person being Boruto, who Sarada's heart is shown thinking of in this moment. That's when it finally happens. Sarada's Sharingan immediately changes into a Mangekyou Sharingan, and we see one of the most broken abilities of the Naruto franchise on display. She basically is creating a black hole that is drawing on Ryu's iron sand and gathering it into one place. She's forcing all this scattered iron sand to gather and free everyone in the process. And this moment hits even harder when you realize that Ikimoto is paying very loose homage to what happened in Dragon Ball, something that hugely inspired Ikimoto as a mangaka. The moment in question is when number 16 tells Son Gohan, it's okay to use power to kill people like Cell, to protect those who you love, because there are just some people you can't reason with. Some people are just evil. It's a loose homage, but it's well done here. Sarada has finally let go, and she's using a power that is a cross between Kamui and what we see with the Otsutsuki vessels when they use the Koma seal to open up the portals. As a result of Sarada's power, Mitsuki and the others are now free to move. Sarada is absorbing all that Iron Sand chakra, and Mitsuki for the first time realizes Sarada has the Mangekyou Sharingan. Now this is telling because it means that Sarada, for the very first time since she awakened the Mangekyou Sharingan, she is now deploying it in battle. And using the Mangekyou, that's a pretty nasty power amp in terms of the increase you get, and that's before you start factoring in the various different powers that your Mangekyou Sharingan gives you. And because the Uchiha's powers are directly linked to their emotions, the stronger they feel hatred, the stronger that they feel emotions like love, it deeply affects their yin chakra and by extension makes them stronger. Uchiha for the longest time have misunderstood this to mean that they need to feel more hatred to grow stronger. So Ikimoto is dabbling in things that directly tie back to small throwaway lines that you probably didn't pay attention to in Naruto, and he's using it as a basis to show you that for as strong as Sarada has shown herself to be so far, she's about to get a lot stronger, because that 3-tomo Sarada showed off that she was very competent and capable in that Ryu fight, as well as when she was fighting against Hidari in the last arc. She was able to damage a guy that was strong enough that he could cancel out Boruto's base Rasengan. So when you start stacking on Mangekyou Sharingan on top of that, you're starting to see why Boruto felt so comfortable and confident that Sarada could be the one that buys him time, that fights alongside him. And now we're about to see Boruto's faith in Sarada fully rewarded. This is further building on a concept from Naruto, which is the third Hokage, Haku, Gaara, and other characters directly state that when a shinobi has something precious to protect, when they have someone that they love they have to protect, when they have someone that they just love in general, it makes them tap into their full power. Sarada has basically tapped into her power because of love, which that is an overarching theme of this arc of itself. and seeing her and Konohamaru on opposite sides in terms of the love perspective. One acknowledged their feelings, the other one is shocked and held back by their feelings. One gets a mental nerf, the other one gets a mental amp. It's very poetic writing. With Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 21, the power levels, they've gone all the way through the roof, and the daughter of Sasuke Uchiha has officially broken ground for uncomfortable conversations that have to be had in regards to where she ranks in the Uchiha clan pecking order. But more importantly, as Sarada has started to rise to a level of greatness, Boruto Uzumaki has descended onto the battlefield, bringing with him the looming shadow of Jura appears ready to be cast over the battlefield now that Boruto's there. However, for as big as those nuggets of information are, the journey to how we got there is equally as important. So we open up the chapter with a flashback, or rather a series of flashbacks that show the various events from Sarada's perspective that start out slowly and quickly serve as a crescendo for the reveal of Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan and to explain to people how she awakened it in the first place. We see Sarada looking over the village with Chocho at some point during Boruto Part 1, where she tells Chocho that her dream is to become Hokage, and based on the design, it appears as if this was set after the events of Naruto Gaiden, the 7th Hokage, and the Scarlet Spring, which for anime watchers, you know that as the Shin Uchiha arc. But we can surmise from this that Sarada doesn't have her headband, so this is likely after that, and neither does Chocho, which Chocho is just as boy crazy as you remember her to be from early Boruto, with her only ambition at this point being finding a boyfriend. This leads to Sarada recalling Boruto's promise to be the shadow for her as a future Hokage, to continue to serve in the role that Sasuke has for Naruto. We see Sarada blushing, and then we see Sumire asking Sarada from Part 1 if it bothers her if Boruto's popular with the other girls because it bothers Sumire, and now we get a small glimpse into what Sarada's real answer on that was. But the way that Ikimoto panels it, he makes the good choice of showing Naruto explaining that to Sarada, this is what it means to be Hokage, which another interesting choice here is that Ikimoto basically redrew a scene from Naruto Gaiden, but he did it from Sarada's perspective, which I totally love that Easter egg. We then transition over to a shot of Sarada running through the village, and we get deeper insight into all of her feelings, in particular her insecurities when she says that she is not an amazing shinobi, which is something I find very interesting just given where Sarada was as a Genin in Part 1, but it's a nice homage to the mistake that her own father made in Naruto Part 1, where Sasuke couldn't see how much progress he had made because he was measuring his own strength in comparison to Naruto's growth, basically being annoyed that Naruto was growing at a faster rate than himself, that he couldn't see his own progress. Sarada, at this point, she has her ninja headband. She is a Genin. She has gone on missions, but she has clearly made the same mistake as her father. Before Boruto started using the Karma Seal, her and Boruto, they were always relative to each other in base. When Kakashi called Boruto easily above Chunin level in the anime, everything we saw leading up to that suggested Sarada was relative to Boruto. In the Boruto movie novel and in the manga promotional material for the Versus Momoshiki arc chapters, it said that her and Boruto was scaled to Jonin level of power, yet her comrade was gaining power via the Karma Seal that suddenly had him strong enough that Naruto was forced to brace himself in base to take blows from Boruto and Karma and use Shadow Clone trickery to win their sparring match, where Boruto uses that lightning release jutsu and detonates Naruto's Shadow Clone. Momoshiki took over Boruto's body and just destroyed Boro in one hit. She was being left behind as more time passed, and we see here that just like it did in the anime, it was weighing on her. Long before she ever told Mitsuki that they needed to get strong enough to fight against Otsutsuki in chapter 69 of Boruto Part 1. Sarada then says that she can't waste time thinking about pointless things, which those pointless things are implied to be sorting out her feelings for Boruto because she is locked in on becoming Hokage, which brings us to the moment that Boruto saves Sarada from being killed by Kawaki, and we see how she viewed Kawaki from that perspective, which is interesting. Then the memories, they jump forward to the night that Omnipotence was casted, and now Naruto's been announced dead, and Sasuke was saying that he was going to kill Boruto for trying to kill Kawaki and for killing Naruto and Hinata, and we start seeing the beginning of Sarada's emotional breakdown here as she learns what happens and she begins to shed tears for Boruto because once again Boruto has to carry a cruel burden on his own. This leads to the Mangekyou Sharingan and what these flashback panels were truly intended for. It wasn't just to give us a deep look into Sarada doubting herself. It was to once again drive home something that I said 2 years ago when this chapter dropped in that video titled Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan was not bad writing, because there are too many people who misremember how the Mangekyou Sharingan is stated to awaken in the manga and what truly causes it. The common thought that a lot of people have is that you just kill your best friend or you see a friend die. People harken back to Itachi saying that that was the requirement, when the manga tells us that that's not the only requirement. The eyes of the Uchiha, they evolve when there's either a loss of a loved one, which is where you have the more common thing that people remember, someone being killed in front of you, or it comes from despair and deep mental disappointment in oneself during an extremely traumatic experience. This is Ikimoto laying everything out for you as a reader. Sarada's idol was Naruto. She strived to get stronger to be Hokage after Naruto steps down. Boruto is someone who is special to her in more ways than just a friend. Kawaki literally just tried to kill her and Boruto. Now she has learned that everyone's memories of Boruto and Kawaki are swapped, and at the time they didn't have answers as to how. They only had speculation. Her own father, someone who Boruto idolized, someone who Boruto wanted to walk in his shoes, he's out there saying that he's gonna hunt down Boruto to kill him to avenge the death of Naruto and Hinata, which is another shock to Sarada because her idol is now dead. Someone she herself said more than once, like say in episode 205 of the anime, that she wished that Naruto was her father instead of Sasuke, and she's now shedding tears at the helplessness and disappointment in herself that came from being powerless to stop Mitsuki and Sasuke from hunting down Boruto to kill him. Death doesn't have to be right in your face to awaken Mangekyou Sharingan, and Sasuke explains this to Boruto, a perfect balance of show and tell. Sasuke tells Boruto, who now has been bandaged up after their conversation with Ada and Damon in chapter 80 of Boruto Part 1, and he says Mangekyou Sharingan is a mutation of the Sharingan that is awakened when you undergo extreme mental or emotional shock, basically extreme trauma. This is why Sasuke ultimately chose to trust in Sarada to save Boruto, because the Mangekyou Sharingan are stated to be the eyes that reflect the heart, in particular for a clan that is stated to feel love on a deeper level than any other clan in the series, which is why Sasuke has protected Boruto. Sasuke tells Boruto that Sarada didn't even appear to realize what had happened, but says so when she does realize it, that Mangekyou Sharingan power is about to be broken, which it is, as we'll see in a moment. And part of the reason why is the triangles in her eye. They are a straight pattern, which we learn in Naruto's manga. They are stronger Mangekyou Sharingan than others, and they are extremely rare, that being a straight pattern Mangekyou Sharingan. This brings us to Sarada staring down Ryu with an enraged look on her face as everyone begins to figure out what's going on, and Yodo's dead body is being held by her teammate. Ryu tries to launch an attack with this iron sand, which Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan is able to absorb because part of her power is making those black holes that float behind her. Each has different functions that we'll touch on in a moment in terms of what it can do. For now, all you need to know is that the jutsu is being sucked into that black hole when she's able to make eye contact with whatever. Ryu jumps to the same conclusion, and he tries to get a sneak attack by attacking Sarada from the blind spot, but Sarada quickly reacts to it, and once again Ryu is sucked up into that black hole, except this time it's not just the one standing beside her, but instead Sarada has another black hole that is able to suck the iron sand up into it from the opposite direction. And you can tell that Ryu's reaction to Sarada is basically her taking control of the battlefield, and he's trying to figure out what her power is and how it works. But now the number of black holes, it is 4, and they have Ryu and the claw grimes completely boxed in. Basically all of Sarada's blind spots are covered now. It should be worth noting that Sarada has 8 triangles in her eye, but we have 4 black holes that are being shown, which lines up with the fact that she's only using 1 power of the two unique powers that her Mangekyou Sharingan has. This is where we see the other benefit of those black holes that she has. She is able to control the gravity of the targets, and she lifts herself up and Ryu into the sky high above the desert, which I want to address something I've been seeing with people. Her using gravity manipulation to use a pseudo form of flight that's no different than the Deva path, using the push and pull element to fly in the Pain arc, and it's no different than Onoiki and the current Tsuchikage flying during the 4th Great Ninja War. Characters can fly in the Naruto universe without 6 Paths chakra. This is nothing new. Ryu tries to use his Iron Sand to penetrate the ground. He's trying to anchor himself and to pull himself back down towards the ground. But Sarada, she makes light work of that Iron Sand once again, and Mitsuki explains it to the audience that Sarada's power allows her to manipulate gravity by using those black holes or spears, depending on the translation you get. Very curious to see what Viz Media calls it. The spear that she controls, it functions like a black hole. So black hole, they suck things in using gravity, which is extremely strong because a black hole is a massive amount of mass, but it is condensed down into a tiny point. When you condense high volumes of stuff into a small point, it makes it stronger. This is called a singularity because every object has gravity, but black holes are more intense due to the large amount of mass that is condensed into that small space, which can pull so strong that not even light itself can escape, which is how stars, lights, and planets can be sucked into black holes, just as Sarada is doing with Ryu's attacks. But as Mitsuki says, she is able to select what she is sucking up into that hole. This leads to Sarada telling Ryu that she's not running away anymore. She felt as if her goal of being Hokage was too far away because of when all those events happened, like say the battle with Ishiki and then later on the battle with Code where Boruto died, and she found out after the fact she wasn't able to do anything. Her own inability to participate, it scared her, and that makes sense. You want to be Hokage, yet the threats that the Hokage faces now, they're well above any threats that the Hokages 1 through 6 have ever had to face. Dealing with an Orochimaru, dealing with a Madara, dealing with a Kaguya, dealing with a Toneri with the Tenseigan, that is a cakewalk compared to what you had with Jigen and then later on Ishiki. Even now, her own feelings for Boruto, that's something that she wasn't ready to accept, weighing them against Sumire's open admission of liking Boruto. She looked at all that like it was a weakness getting in the way of her goal to be Hokage, so she ignored it. But she also concedes that she knew she was denying this power that is inside of her, in particular saying that she kept it hidden, power that was originally awakened in response to her helplessness due to Boruto's situation and being unable to do anything for a person she cares deeply for. Whereas Mitsuki is looking like he wants all the tea right here. Ryu is basically saying she needs to go to therapy, and that's where we get a very interesting set of lettering that I'm going to be very curious to see if Viz Media uses translation notes for, which as a reminder, they stopped doing translation notes for God knows what reason. But shouts out to one of my favorite translators that are online, Salad Bolts, who lives over in Japan, came in very clutch here, reliable translator. So the lettering that is used is a Japanese word that can be used to describe someone with darkness in their heart, is mentally unstable, or they're a woman obsessed with their partner in a romantic relationship, which that is a classic example of what longtime viewers of the channel have heard me say repeatedly. Japanese to English is not a verbatim translation because it is context heavy, and there are usually 3 to 4 different meanings for various words. It just depends on the context of how they're used, which that makes this one tricky because literally every definition applies here. This leads to Sarada choosing in that moment to use her Mangekyou Sharingan to draw in Ryu's body into one of those black holes to begin sucking him up into it, and Sarada looks down at Ryu saying that she is done running away because running away means you can't save people. And we see Yodo's dead body, which spark up a blunt for Yodo. She died way too soon. As Sarada begins to increase the gravity of the black hole, Ryu desperately tries to make a claw grime that he pulls from his body to use it to escape, which does get Jura's attention, but Sarada clocks what he's trying to do and increases the gravity to a point he can't even fully use the Shinjutsu that is known as the Claw Mark in order to escape. This leads to Sarada stating that she's gonna be Hokage, which if this is anything like the effect it had on Naruto, who we learned in the first Naruto fan book that every time Naruto said that he was going to be Hokage during the midst of a fight, Naruto actually got a mental amp, because it's the concept of Kotodama, the Japanese belief that words give power when you speak them. Hence why you see so many anime characters with special moves and they shout them out. If this applies to Sarada, then she got a mental amp here and a well-timed one. And this is where Sarada reveals the name of her Mangekyou Sharingan power, and as she does so, all 8 triangles from her Mangekyou, they are shown in a gorgeous single-page spread for the reveal, which bravo for that. Everyone clamors for double-page spreads, but series like Boruto and Eden Zero and Full Metal Alchemist that will use single-page spreads just as effective. This Mangekyou Sharingan is called the Mangekyou Sharingan Ohirume, which is a connection to Amaterasu, the Japanese deity who Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan is patterned after. So the translation you get when you place the accent mark, very important, over the U, it comes down to the Great Sun Lady, or she who is a noble woman of the Great Sun, which is fitting since Sarada is of the Uchiha clan, one of the 4 noble clans of Konoha. It's also a nod to another title that Amaterasu has, which is Ohirume no Muchi no Kami, which is she who illuminates the heavens, which cue up the memes of Sarada being the new Gojo, where he talks about himself in the heavens when he's fighting against Fushiguro back during that flashback. This leads to a monstrous display of power by Sarada. That black hole, it sucks Ryu in and it explodes. This was a nod to the Hawking radiation theory of black holes, which is that after 1 trillion years, black holes become so compressed and dense with mass that they eventually reach a point where it releases a final burst of energy in the form of an explosion, which, reminder, Boruto as a series has dabbled with science before. It's one of the core conflicts. Where does science fit into this world of ninja? So that does line up with this aspect. It's at this point that Sarada, her eyes, they're bleeding more than before. She's falling onto the ground. She's closing her eyes in exhaustion, and Mitsuki has to catch her. With the victory over Ryu now being secured, which that is a big deal. Ryu was not a pushover in terms of power. There's this notion to just go, oh, the Shinju, they're made out of 10 tails, so they gotta be 10 tails level, which is basically the same thing as saying if somebody's using Sage Mode, they're as strong as Sage Mode Naruto, or if a Dragon Ball character goes Super Saiyan, they're only strongest Namek Saga Goku, when in reality, this is not the case. So they are made from a collection of different things. I want you to think of it like a recipe for a meal. You're in the kitchen and you're adding all these ingredients together for whatever it is you're about to eat. So you have 10 tails chakra. They also have the chakra of Code, who has his limiters removed and is now stronger than Jigen. You have Code's Karma Seal, which contains the essence from Ishiki, but cannot be used for resurrection purposes, but that Karma has the essence in it. And Boruto says in chapter 6, even though Code is not an Otsutsuki, the power itself that is in that Karma is Otsutsuki power, which is used to influence all of this. And Jura later confirms Boruto's theory about Code being the one who birthed these awakened Shinju using that. You also have the chakra of the person that the claw grind bit in order to create the Thorn Soul bulb. So you're taking the chakra of someone like Sasuke and you're placing it into a pot. And due to the Shinju being made from Code, they also have Shibai cells, which is another power buff. That is why Mamushi, who was made from Bug's chakra, Bug was a pushover. That is why Mamushi was strong enough to put base Boruto on a defensive. So you're taking all of that stuff, you're stirring it in the pot, and you're containing all that chakra in the humanoid body. That's why you have the completed dish that you do. This is why Code could not break out of Ryu's chokehold despite actively trying and then begging to be released because he couldn't break free of his own power. That is why Ryu was never impressed with Code when he saw him use Karma to try and attack Jura, and why Jura casually told Ryu, hey, yeah, if you want to kill Code next time you see him, feel free. They are above Code in power, which is scary given that base Code was strong enough that adult Sasuke told Boruto, quote, "We stand no chance against him," end quote. And Boruto is confirmed to have attempted to use the Coma Seal, which lends itself to base code's power level being that high, which makes Jura's assessment about Ryu getting the green light to kill Code make that much more sense. Linear scaling. Moving back to the story though, as Mitsuki is tending to Sarada, he notices that the Thorn Soul bulb it is manifesting, which transitions us over to Ada speaking to Boruto and Kashin Koji. She says that Ryu was killed by Sarada, and Kashin Koji reveals that everything is going according to plan if Yodo had to be sacrificed, which that definitely sets Boruto off immediately. So if you recall, Boruto asked in chapter 17, what were the chances of failure? And Koji said it wasn't that high that they would fail, but Koji purposely left out that there would be those who needed to die in order to get the outcome that he wanted. Basically pawns that are being sacrificed on the chessboard. He confronts Koji asking, was this the only way? And Koji doubles down saying that Boruto getting involved, had that happened, Sarada's Mangekyou Sharingan power would have never reawakened, and he didn't think that it mattered if Boruto knew Yodo died because they still got the outcome they needed. And that's the difference between Koji and Jiraiya. Whereas Jiraiya would have been more sensitive, Koji is cold, pragmatic, and calculated. Boruto realizing that Koji has no problems letting other people die, he demands to know what will happen to Konohamaru, and Koji tells him, after hesitating, that Jura has shared senses with all the Shinju on the battlefield, and that if Boruto shows himself, it will result in Boruto getting killed because Koji has seen multiple possible futures where all this happens. That's where we jump over to Konohamaru, who's in the process of being killed by Matsuri, which goes back to the last chapter. Konohamaru does not scale to Matsuri. That's disingenuous scaling, just like people scaling Chocho to being relative to Jura because she was able to knock a stationary Jura being held in place by Shikadai's shadow possession jutsu. This was more so he used a sneak attack to catch her off guard, which is why being hit by a double giant Rasengan when you are completely off guard almost destroyed her body as a sucker punch. If I walk up to Roman Reigns tomorrow at WrestleMania Night 1, as of this recording, and I hit him from behind, I can knock him out. I'm not as strong as Roman though. A shuriken gets lodged in Matsuri's shoulder, and Boruto, he's teleported onto the battlefield, and by doing so, he's confirmed for Mitsuki that those metal pieces that Boruto leaves behind, they are used for teleportation purposes. So now all eyes are on Mitsuki. Does he tell Kawaki, who can shrink those markers in the future? So file that away, and we'll come back to that in future chapters. Boruto doesn't hesitate. He draws his sword, and he hacks Matsuri into pieces, and Kashin Koji curses Boruto, because now Jura has realized that Boruto's there, and Jura appears ready to make his move. And for Boruto Uzumaki, it means coming face to face with the very person that Kashin Koji told him he cannot defeat in a battle, and even worse, he has to do so with his strongest ally, Sarada, completely unconscious, unable to assist in the battle, which means that Boruto has opened Pandora's box. The only question left is, can he survive what comes out the box? Can he survive Jura? Is he destined to die? Or can Boruto once again defy fate? We'll find out in the next chapter. Boruto Uzumaki is dying, and seemingly nothing can stop it, just as Kashin Koji warned Boruto. His strongest Rasengan, the Rasengan Uzuhiko, it's shattered and made useless because of Jura's Bijudama. Jura, the awakened Shinju of destruction, has finally arrived, and he's not playing games. For the first time in 3 years, since Kawaki literally killed him, Boruto is staring death in the face yet again. Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 22 isn't just another battle. This is the moment where everything changes. The battlefield is soaked in dread. Boruto's on the ropes, and the monster at the center of it all might be unstoppable. Strap in, because we're diving headfirst into the most terrifying chapter of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex yet. So we open up the chapter with Jura immediately making his presence known, just as our heroes are recovering from the two major battles that have wrapped up. Sarada has defeated Ryu, but she is now too weakened to be of use, and Boruto has defeated Matsuri. The moment moment that Mitsuki declares that they will be taking down the remaining claw grinds as Araya takes the Thorn Soul bulb produced by Ryu's body to Shinki to release him from that seal, Jura pops out the back of one of the claw grinds, and this is where it gets interesting. Jura takes one look at the battlefield, at all the people that are gathered there, and his eyes, they settle on Sarada for a moment, the girl who confronted her dormant feelings to achieve a higher form of power, a girl who embodies the emotion called love that Jura fears due to the unpredictability of it, and instead of killing her, he just flies away, which that speaks volumes. Previously, when a Thorn Soul bulb had been produced, following the defeat of awakened Shinju, Jura went right for it, nearly killing Boruto in chapter 12 and shooting Sarada in the arm, but this time his attention it is elsewhere. He's once again going after Boruto, who is in a deep conversation with Konohamaru. Konohamaru states that he can't believe how fast Matsuri is taken down, and Boruto reveals that the only reason that this was possible is because Matsuri was already severely wounded. Boruto drops a bombshell saying that had Matsuri been at full power, he wouldn't have been able to take her down as easily as he did, which somewhere Shikamaru is getting another gold plaque for his Super Shinobi of the Year award for that killer strategy he cooked up with Kashin Koji, which was to earn the trust of the awakened Shinju, get them to lower their guard, and then kill them when they see the attack not coming. Basically a sucker punch, which, a reminder, you can't use Konohamaru destroying Matsuri, her arms and part of her body using a double giant Rasengan because she is off guard. Konohamaru rizzed up Matsuri, taking advantage of the feelings that Moegi has for Konohamaru, and he was almost able to take her down, but Boruto saved him and finished the job. However, Boruto saving Konohamaru, it came at a cost. Jura has now locked in on his prey, looking every bit like the apex predator that Kashin Koji described him to be. A Bijudama sniper bullet gets shot in their direction with the intention of just blowing them all up, but the aim it is off a little, and Boruto knows right away that this is Jura and basically tells Konohamaru, grab Matsuri's Thorn Soul bulb and get out of here. Realizing that his time is short, Boruto goes into prep mode, throwing various flying Raijin markers around the area, while Konohamaru asks for confirmation if the Thorn Soul bulb can save Moegi, but Boruto, he's in full panic mode right now. He tells Konohamaru, take the Thorn Soul bulb, then grab Sarada and the others and get the hell out of there. Go all the way back to where you met the Sound Village ninja and wait for instructions, which likely means Boruto has another flying Raijin marker set up there as well that wasn't discovered, or he's banking on Mitsuki still having the one he found several chapters ago. When Konohamaru pushes back against Boruto, Boruto loses it yet again, shouting at Konohamaru to leave, and we see the effects of omnipotence rear its tragic head into the story. Had this been the Boruto who Konohamaru remembered before omnipotence, he wouldn't question what he was being told, realizing that this was a comrade who he could trust and just go along with it. However, due to omnipotence, Konohamaru's memories of Boruto, they aren't of the bubbly-eyed kid who used to complain about his father being too busy and who begged Konohamaru to teach him the Rasengan, but instead, Konohamaru remembers him as the disrespectful and ungrateful brat who Konohamaru never wanted on Team 7, but Naruto in chapter 58 of Boruto Part 1 basically said, let them train together because this kid's my student. In Konohamaru's mind, this is the guy who killed Konohamaru's idol Naruto, and you have to believe that some of the frustration that is coming through in Boruto's voice right now is because of this very fact. However, another Bijudama gets shot in the direction, and Boruto saves Konohamaru's life yet again and immediately buys time for him by teleporting behind Jura, slamming a Rasengan into him from behind. This is enough to seemingly send Jura backwards a bit and put him on a defensive, yet what little edge that the flying Raijin gave Boruto, it's been negated now because Jura quickly shoots another Bijudama at Boruto and the battle, it heats up. Boruto dodges by teleporting away yet again and tries to get Jura in another uncomfortable position by appearing where Jura was about to land, but Jura blocks Boruto's sword attack with his literal finger. This, of course, is yet another of the many homages to Ikimoto's favorite manga of all time, Dragon Ball, by the late great Akira Toriyama, where Goku blocked Future Trunks' sword attack with one finger. However, unlike Son Goku, who had zero killing intent, Jura, he means all business right now. But even someone like Jura, he's a man of culture, enough to the point he gives Boruto props for his flying Raijin, but this line of dialogue, it should stand out to you. He talks about his bad habit that shows itself when he fights against strong people like Boruto, which is clearly a nod to how strong Himawari was, even though he was playing around with her. Jura says he gets excited, and the reason this should stand out isn't so much for a power scaling reason for Boruto and Himawari. It should stand out to you because this is exactly what Jigen said following the battle with Naruto and Sasuke. Jigen told Amado that playing around in fights was a bad habit of his when Amado is treating his body in episode 205 of the anime, which is crazy just given all that it took was 5 hits from a transformed Jigen to leave Naruto and Sasuke near death. The fact he was playing around means that he could have ended the fight even sooner had he wanted to. Jura appears to have that same personality, which is interesting since it shows a flaw in this all-powerful character who seemingly had zero weaknesses until now. Playing around on the battlefield with shinobi who use deception, all it takes is one moment and they can find an opening to take you down. Unfortunately for Boruto, that moment hasn't presented itself yet, but like any great shinobi before him, Boruto has to be patient and wait for that moment to show itself. The story then shifts over to Ada and Kashin Koji, deep in conversation, with Ada filling Kashin Koji in on everything that's happening, but Kashin Koji is clearly pissed off at Boruto. He tells Ada that Boruto doesn't have a 1 in a million chance at even defeating Jura as he is now, meaning that in the future Boruto could have defeated Jura. But when Ada tells Kashin Koji that Boruto should just run away, we get another bombshell. Boruto cannot run away, and this is where we see yet another of the many weaknesses that Boruto's flying Raijin jutsu has, and they're all being exposed right now. For Boruto, teleporting extremely long distances using flying Raijin is extremely hard. He can't do it on a whim like Minato or Tobirama. He needs to have time to concentrate, like we saw when Kawaki confronted him at the end of chapter 3 and at early chapter 4 to Blue Vortex. Boruto needed several moments to use the seal of concentration and then lock in on his marker to enter into the Ten Tails dimension. Against someone like Jura, Boruto won't have the time to escape, and Kashin Koji correctly states that that's what Boruto's plan is, and it's a foolish one. Boruto's waiting for the others to get far enough away and Boruto will then try to escape, but Kashin Koji declares this is useless, that they've lost, and it's not an over-exaggeration when you take all of this into account. Boruto's flying Raijin has more weaknesses than just that, especially when compared to Minato and Tobirama, which I'm not going to cover here, but check my video All 6 Flying Raijin Users Explained to learn about the weaknesses that Boruto has compared to the other 5 users of the jutsu. Meanwhile, Jura tells Boruto, hey, I am indeed here to kill you because you know too much about me and all of my goals. Despite the fact that we awakened Shinju, we've only existed for a short period of time, and he says, I want the source of your intel, the name of the person who is helping you. But as this is going on, Boruto, he's in panic mode even further now, realizing his only hope at this moment is to use the Rasengan Uzehiko, his strongest jutsu, because nothing else has worked. However, Jura hits Boruto with another question. He asks him, Boruto, what is love? Telling him that love is a weakness to mankind because it goes against the very survival instincts of humans. And one thing that is being missed here by Boruto is the way that he's looking at Jura. It just kind of showcases the fact that he's viewing these Shinju as trees, as objects. You can see it on his face. He doesn't see them as humans. And I bring that up for this reason. Shikamaru and Kashin Koji's initial plan to betray the Shinju, it spoke more so about the fact that humanity is something that all beings can feel to a certain extent. Even animals have feelings. Whether or not you want to say they have souls, that's another debate for another day. But I say that to say this: sometimes you make people monsters without actually intending to do so. And this whole get their trust and betray them for a moment, Ikimoto really makes you stop and think, are the shinobi truly the bad guys because they're playing with emotions the way that Konohamaru played with Matsuri's emotions, for example? So as we go forward with Boruto's interactions, just keep that in the back of your mind. Jura tells Boruto that it's pretty much his love for his friends that lead to Boruto coming here to face Jura, even though he knows it will be the end of him. It goes against everything logical. It confounds Jura. This makes even more sense when you go back to the last 2 chapters and you see how alarmed Jura was when he saw Matsuri impacted by Moegi's feelings for Konohamaru, and how hearing Matsuri's voice caused Konohamaru to pull back on the AP of his double giant Rasengan, which should have killed Matsuri, yet it didn't for that reason. Love got in the way in both of those examples. On the other hand, love can also be used to awaken strength to do impossible things, like we saw with Sarada's character, where she tapped into the Mangekyou Sharingan power and she outright demolished Ryu using that emotion, which in the Japanese version of the manga, Ryu calls her an emo girl obsessed with her love life. But in this moment, Sarada not only accepted her feelings that she had pushed away, but also understood that those feelings, they don't make her weak, but instead they can make her strong enough to beat people like Ryu as well, in order to protect the very people she cares for, in this case Boruto. All of this is illogical and it drives Jura crazy. Someone extremely logical cannot grasp a feeling like love, which is why he wants answers. And this just further fits into one of the themes of the arc. Everyone focuses on the love aspect, but one of the sub themes of this arc is these Shinju are asking the question of what does it mean to be humanity, and that question, it is causing some lines to be blurred. There is a yearning to understand humanity when you get down deep into the weeds of these characters. However, Boruto's completely out of it because he realizes that while he needs to use Uzuhiko, he's unable to do so because his feet, they aren't on the ground, which once again, we're seeing one of the weaknesses of Boruto's ninjutsu arsenal being used against him, even without his enemy even knowing it. As he explained in chapter 12 of Two Blue Vortex, he needs to have both of his feet on the ground to gather chakra from the planet to use Uzuhiko and charge it at full power. And in order to do that, he needs an extended period of time, and based on his actions, it doesn't seem as if he can use shadow clones when using this jutsu, likely due to the high concentration that it requires to perform the jutsu. And with shadow clones, when you're performing tasks that require intense concentration, there is a limit to how many clones you can make. That's not my headcanon. This is shown multiple times in Naruto's manga, most famously in the Pain arc. One of the multiple times this is explained, because clones can get distracted, but we'll obviously say that for another video. Now, Jura takes advantage of Boruto's situation to trap him in a wood-release jutsu to restrain him, and we see the genius of Boruto on full display here. He takes a negative situation and uses it to his advantage, because he points out the lore behind the sword that fell to the ground, knowing that Jura's insane thirst for knowledge will get the better of him. Boruto states the sword on the ground, that belongs to his master Sasuke, basically telling Jura that sword, it is precious to me. Jura takes the time to prod Boruto for more info about love and offers to not harm the sword in exchange for Boruto telling him where his source of information is located. But Boruto takes the time to indulge him by saying that love, it can be a weakness, but basically that Jura's lack of understanding about love proves his belief that Jura and the other Shinju aren't humans to be correct. And that's where we see Boruto hadn't been taking the time to have a conversation with Jura, but instead he was preparing the Uzuhiko in secret. And this is where we get a very interesting reveal, because once the Rasengan Uzuhiko has been made, Boruto is able to then combine it with the Flying Raijin, which makes this jutsu under most circumstances more dangerous. And so after Boruto is able to tag Jura with it, and Jura is hit with the effects of the jutsu, you think that you're home free, but as it is with all things Jura, what you see isn't truly what it is beneath the surface. And this, my friends, is where Boruto's downfall truly begins, because he gets a little too cocky. He starts patronizing Jura with his speech the same way he did to Code, telling him everything that it is that he's experiencing in this moment about how his equilibrium is messed up. But Jura isn't an idiot like Code. And so once he hears this information, Jura correctly starts making adjustments. He places his hand on top of his chest and does something with the chakra inside of his body, and he is able to nullify the effect of the Uzahiko, which it should be worth noting on the official Naruto website in the database entry for the Uzahiko, it talks about how it has a centrifugal force that is being used for this jutsu when Boruto draws on the chakra of the Earth's planet. The Rasengan is something that uses centripetal force. So basically it is a reversal, if you will, a perfect counter to what we're seeing here. And there's a level of poetic symbolism here when you really get down into the weeds of what you're seeing. Jura is a tailed beast. Minato, Boruto's grandfather, created the Rasengan after seeing the 4 and the 5 tails prepare to use a Bijudama to kill Minato, Jiraiya, and the other 2 members of their team. Minato made that jutsu specifically for fighting tailed beasts. Boruto was using a variation of the Rasengan, a jutsu his grandfather made, and now a tailed beast was able to counter a more advanced version of Minato's jutsu, because again, Minato never completed the Rasengan. That is very poetic there. But in the aftermath of this, Boruto realizes that if this was an RPG, he suddenly had an aha moment where he realizes that Jura is that level 99 floor boss, and Boruto, unfortunately, is still stuck at level 70, and that's where our chapter ends off. And it is in this moment that we as the audience, we see exactly what Kashi and Koji meant. Boruto cannot defeat Jura as he is now. We are seeing an apex predator. We are seeing why Kashi and Koji told Boruto, you must follow my exact path to grow stronger, because Boruto's ace in the hole jutsu, it didn't work. We open up the chapter with a change of scenery. Mitsuki has managed to take down all the remaining claw grimes on the battlefield while in Sage mode, impressively protecting an unconscious Sarada as he does so. And just as he wraps up the battle, he's joined by Konohamaru, who is carrying Matsuri's Thorn Soul Bulb, desperate to get away. However, as Mitsuki scoops up Sarada, Konohamaru is quickly brought up to speed by his pupil, being told that Araya went to Shinki's location so that he can use the Thorn Soul Bulb that was gained when Sarada blew up Ryu to save Shinki, and then use Shinki to save Gaara, which presumably afterwards means he'll take Yodo's dead body back to the Sand Village to be buried. Konohamaru remarks that her loss wasn't in vain then, since it means they did manage to get the Thorn Soul Bulb back to save their Kazekage. It's a somber reminder that lives were lost so that a small glimpse of hope could be given to Tsunagakure. Konohamaru then tells Mitsuki how Boruto saved him, but when he did so, it brought Jura to the battlefield, and Konohamaru, with his brilliant 2000 level IQ, deduced that killing Boruto is a greater priority for Jura than getting his comrade's Thorn Soul Bulbs back, which is such an obvious observation that 12-year-old Naruto would have put down the glue he was eating and came to the same conclusion. But what this does is give us a stark reminder of, yet again, how things have changed. For Konohamaru, he didn't leave behind his student to face Jura. He basically left an enemy of the state. As far as he's concerned, they can kill each other off and save Konoha the trouble, which is why he shoots down Mitsuki's suggestion to support Boruto in the battle with Jura. This leads to Konohamaru stating that they must go back to their original rendezvous point where they met the Sand Village ninjas when they first arrived, stating that Boruto requested this and that they have to trust Boruto as a plan. But unfortunately for Konohamaru, Boruto's plan, it isn't going too well right now. Boruto's battle with Jura, it just took another turn for the worse, because as Konohamaru has been running to safety, Boruto's being used as target practice, getting Bijudamas shot into his body, just barely missing vital spots, and Jura has Boruto fleeing as a result, trying to put distance between himself and Jura, but he can only go so far before Jura spots him hiding on a cliff. And as he begins to take flight, we see just how much Jura's been playing with Boruto. He's been merely testing testing out how he uses Bijudama, changing the size and the shapes of them, practicing scatter shots and sniper style attacks, basically using Boruto as a training module for his attacks. And this leads to Boruto going on alert because Jura is on the move now. Within seconds, he's in the air preparing another Bijudama to shoot off from his Rinnegan, but Boruto takes to the skies again, not even attempting to fight back. The only thing on his mind right now is survival and waiting for the right moment to show itself for a counterattack because his enemy is too strong to fight head up. Boruto begins to zip around the air in one gorgeous set of paneling that looks like it's straight out the Dragon Ball manga, with how well Ikimoto paneled this whole sequence, showing Boruto curving in mid-air, avoiding the Bijudama, throwing a kunai at Jura, the kunai following the trajectory of the speed lines as Jura is preparing that next Bijudama. Hopefully we see more of the flight aspect being introduced into the series, because as a Dragon Ball fan, flight took Dragon Ball to another level, and Boruto could benefit from the 360-degree aspect of aerial battles, because this is one area where Ikimoto blows Naruto series creator Masashi Kishimoto out the water, because what little flight Kishimoto tried in Naruto, to be blunt, it left a lot to be desired. Jura, as you would expect, isn't being fazed by the kunai. He just outright disregards it, probably reading in a book somewhere that outside of Momoshiki destroying Sasuke's Rinnegan, kunai, they are just as useless as Amaterasu. But that arrogance, it cost him for a moment. Boruto secretly marked his kunai with the flying Raijin to teleport to it and draw his sword, this time attempting to get Jura from the blind side, but he quickly has to adjust to Jura's actions. He releases his sword from his grip as Jura goes in for what appears to be a killing jab, and Boruto quickly uses flying Raijin to teleport to the same sword that just fell in order to avoid being skewered, which in Ninja Heaven, Minato's coming up with the long ass name for the move that Boruto just came up with. The brilliance of Boruto, it continues to shine as now that he's got the sword back, he moves to cut Jura's foot off from the top of the calf muscle on down, but all this does is make Jura state that he did a good job, almost like an adult giving a small child a sticker for saying their ABCs, and this leads to Boruto trying to engage with Jura head up, and he quickly realizes that he's outmatched. As Boruto struggles against Jura's assault, Jura grabs hold of his hand that has the sword, and he prepares another point-blank Bijudama, which shows off his intelligence. Due to Boruto's lack of skill with the flying Raijin, he has to make the hand sign for concentration with both of his hands in order to teleport. By grabbing one hand, he's preventing Boruto from doing so, but Jura didn't get the memo. This manga isn't called Jura 2 Blue Vortex. It's called Boruto 2 Blue Vortex. Boruto shows how skilled he is as a shinobi by doing something that only the most elite shinobi can do, as established in Naruto's manga. He weaves the hand signs with one hand for the purple lightning at full power to shock Jura at point blank range to stop the Bijudama from forming, showing that for as much as Boruto still has room to grow with flying Raijin, for a jutsu like purple lightning, he's mastered it enough to be able to perform it with one hand, making him an elite shinobi. However, all this running around has exhausted Boruto to the point Jura is mocking him for his sluggish movements, because Boruto is constantly holding his side where Jura shot him with that Bijudama. The internal injuries, they appear to be getting worse with every movement. It's a wonder that Boruto's even still standing at this point, even accounting for him setting aside chakra for stamina purposes. This causes Jura to shift things into another gear, giving up his pursuit of trying to kill Boruto with the Bijudama, but instead going for the good old-fashioned beatdown, throwing hands, which means that if this was a video game, Jura was just trying to get the win under the special conditions in order to get the bonus prize for beating the floor boss. Meanwhile, Konohamaru has led Mitsuki and the unconscious Sarada back to the rendezvous point, but there is nobody there, leaving them baffled. If they were expecting Boruto to show up, he's too busy literally getting tossed around the battlefield by Jura, and it doesn't take too long before Jura gets tired of doing this, and he tries to nuke Boruto with another Bijudama, but Boruto manages to fly away into the air to escape. But just as Boruto thinks he's gotten away, Jura pops up behind him, and Boruto quickly tries to hack him with his sword, but Jura not only blocks it, but he hits Boruto with enough force force that it chips away at the sword that Sasuke gave him, an indication that Boruto's stamina is beginning to fall, and his skill with the sword, it is beginning to dip because of exhaustion. Classic samurai trope being put on display here. Jura quickly kicks Boruto across the battlefield again, leaving him on the verge of unconsciousness, and the beatdown gets to the point that Ada declares she can't watch this anymore because it is clear Boruto's about to die. And then that's when it happens. Kashin Koji's hands, they go to his head as a new vision with 10 directions comes in, and we learn that Kashin Koji can't control 10 directions, the power he got from Shibai's DNA, the way that Damon can with reflection, or Code can do with his claw marks, or Ada can do with her Senrigan. His pupils, they begin to change, and Kashin Koji tells Ada he's getting another vision of an updated timeline, the first time in almost a week, which means that what Kashin Koji told Boruto in the past, it has happened. When changes get made to a path he saw with 10 directions, Kashin Koji retains knowledge of that path that no longer exists, but all his planning means nothing now because a new future is being made and he doesn't see the timeline branch until it's created. So what did Kashin Koji see? He sees Jura, Inojin, and Himawari. They're the first things he saw. But as more begins to come into focus, we suddenly cut back away to Boruto versus Jura, with Jura preparing to kill the now unconscious Boruto. Jura in this moment is taking absolutely zero chances, noting that Boruto, even while unconscious, is holding on to Sasuke's sword, which has to bring a tear to your eye, given when Sasuke was defeated by Code, he was still holding on to his sword despite being unconscious. Jura takes to the sky, preparing to shoot off another Bijudama, wanting to blow Boruto to bits, but then suddenly Kawaki's chakra rods get slammed through the back of Jura's skull and through his eye socket, with Kawaki in a new outfit rocking the Konoha headband as his belt buckle, with darker colors than before, which is very important to take note of. As Ikimoto said in 2024 back in France, the clothing of characters is intentional because it reflects both the personality and the character arcs, like how every item on Boruto's jacket is a memento to someone dear to him, but also is marked with the flying Raijin marker, and how Sarada's outfit was meant to show her loyalty to Boruto and Sasuke. Kawaki went from the white jacket and some dark colors to now wearing a dark jacket and fewer light colors, showing the transition from light to dark is beginning right as he has gotten Ishiki's power unlocked. And it's not just Ishiki's power, but as he told Amado, he wanted to use scientific methods as well as anything else, which means possibly Shibai cells, in order to get strong enough to kill Jura. So basically think of it as Kawaki had his power level as it was previously. He then got all of Ishiki's power added to it, and then he got scientific enhancements and some other stuff done to him in order to raise his attack power. If he's a video game character, think of that bar just gradually expanding rapidly. Or let's have some real fun with it, right? Like if you're a Pokemon fan like me, basically think of Kawaki as being a Pokemon and Amado is the Pokemon trainer, and instead of training Kawaki, he just fed him a bunch of rare candies in order to level him up very fast. This leads to Kawaki being shown in Kashin Koji's new 10 directions, along with Sarada fighting Hidari yet again, and Kashin Koji realizes that Boruto went behind his back and told Kawaki about Amado placing limiters on his power, and based on Koji's reaction, the timeline change, it might have more than one effect, but he clearly didn't want Kawaki to have Ishiki's power, and yet that move by Boruto resulted in Kawaki saving Boruto. So we are now on a new timeline path that Kashin Koji never accounted for. As this is going on, Delta communicates with Kawaki that Mitsuki, Sarada, and Konohamaru, they are safe, and the battle with Kawaki versus Jura, it immediately ramps up. In the blink of an eye, Kawaki has slammed chakra rods into Jura's body as he's turned around, with Kawaki keeping one giant chakra rod just like we see in that flash forward sequence of Boruto Part 1. Kawaki is now using that as his primary weapon. Jura quickly tries to counter by shooting off a Bijudama, which explodes in the distance, and it begins to wake Boruto up. As Jura is taking the chakra rods out his body, Boruto and Kawaki, they go into a bit of a banter back and forth about Kawaki asking Boruto when he's going to get off of his ass, and Boruto giving a snarky remark as Jura is watching as Kawaki cuts on his karma seal, powering up to face him, and Jura is left stunned, asking how Kawaki improved so much in this short period of time, because the last time he faced Kawaki, he left him cosplaying Sleeping Beauty over by the water tank after 2 hits, and somewhere Code is going, "I told you so," because in chapter 15, Code directly asks, "Why aren't you hunting Otsutsuki? You monsters have one job, consume Otsutsuki," and Jura basically said, "I'm going on side quests right now. I can capture them whenever I want to. You go kill Boruto, make yourself useful." Well, that's come to bite Jura in the rear end now. Kawaki is well aware that Boruto has the inability to use karma, wanting Boruto to grab his balls and man up while he fights Jura, because if Momoshiki takes over Boruto's body, Kawaki states he won't hesitate to kill this weakened Boruto, which leaves us with Kawaki using karma in the basic version 1 state in order to battle Jura, who is charging forward to engage with Kawaki. Kawaki has unleashed everything: his full Otsutsuki power, his karma seal, his rage, his desperation. Blow after blow, it was tearing through Jura's body, and yet Jura just endured. He rebuilt, he rose, and then he sat down on a throne of his own making, towering above Kawaki like a god, peering down at an insect. And Jura asked only one question: Naruto Uzumaki, he isn't really dead, is he? In that one moment, the boy who had built an entire life based upon the lie of being Naruto's son and Boruto having killed Naruto, he now found himself looking up at the very deity-like figure who holds the very means to destroy everything that Kawaki had built. Chapter 24 is not just a fight. Instead, it is a terrifying shift, and not just power, but also in the world around Boruto and Kawaki. It is a psychological reckoning, and Kawaki might finally be put on the fast track to us facing some justice. Let's break down every chilling detail of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 24. So we open up the story hopping into a time machine that takes us all the way back to the part of the conversation that Boruto and Kawaki had in Chapter 15 of 2 Blue Vortex that we didn't get to see conclude. Boruto informs Kawaki that the coming battles in the Land of Wind against the Shinju, they're fast approaching, and he tells him that once he gets his limiters removed, he needs to go to the battlefield and Boruto will be there, and the two of them, they can battle Jura. However, being the ever pragmatic and blunt person that he is, Kawaki informs Boruto that even though it was just a couple of hits, back when Jura hit Kawaki with that crispy 2-piece Popeye's chicken combo attack, Kawaki caught a glimpse of Jura's true power, and that was all Kawaki needed to know that Jura is in a different tier of power than Boruto believes, that Boruto's underestimating Jura, outright saying they can't win if they team up, limiters or no limiters. That's where we see a rather interesting moment from Boruto. He gives Kawaki one of his flying Raijin markers and says that in that case, their goal should be finding a way to stay alive during the battle, since it might be more realistic given who it is that they're going up against, and this is what makes Boruto's decision so very bold. He literally tells Kawaki how his jutsu works, in particular the weaknesses of it, something that a shinobi is supposed to guard, which is both a show of how he still trusts Kawaki, viewing him as a brother, while also a bit heartbreaking because we know where this story ultimately goes. Eventually, Boruto versus Kawaki will happen, and Boruto just gave Kawaki information that he can later use against him. Boruto informs Kawaki that he needs to be able to sense the markers, and that the further away they are, the more time he needs to concentrate on finding the marker, and that while in battle, he can't properly sense that far from a distance, which then transitions us over to the main battle where Kawaki states he will buy Boruto the time he needs, and we see Jura rapidly descending towards Kawaki, and that's where the action goes into full gear, and we see what a newly powered up Kawaki is truly capable of doing. When Jura shoots his Bijudama at Kawaki, he quickly raises his hand and absorbs the blast, but Jura takes advantage of the sheer size of the Bijudama, obstructing Kawaki's field of vision to get behind him. However, just as Jura prepares to snatch Kawaki, he expertly uses his Kokugan in order to shrink down to 1 inch in size, one of the many hacks abilities that he inherited from Ishiki that makes him every bit of the trouble to deal with that Jigen was for Naruto and Sasuke, where he made them beg for mercy in Boruto episode 204. Because what can you do against someone who can absorb your jutsu, shrink your jutsu, and then shrink himself whenever you get too close to attacking him? It's not impossible to beat that person, but it becomes a whole lot more difficult than you would have liked. This is made even more so the case when you realize that Kawaki has shrank himself down and quickly zipped away from the area. And while doing that, he has simultaneously summoned 4 giant chakra disruption cubes to try to attack Jura, and it's brilliant. Even if it doesn't smash Jura with the cubes themselves, they have disruption abilities that negate the sensory abilities of anybody in the immediate vicinity of the cubes, which if Jura had sensory abilities that we don't know that he has, then he couldn't use them while in the immediate reach of those cubes. Jura quickly shoots out one of the disruption cubes while Boruto flies away to safety, doing his best to suppress his karma seal to avoid Momoshiki from emerging to make an already chaotic battlefield even more hectic. It's at this moment that Kawaki swoops in, and this time he's using the ninja tech in his body to transform it into that giant wooden claw to smash Ishiki and send him flying backwards with the force of the attack and back into the direction of the remaining chakra cubes that Jura did not destroy. And just as Jura is looking around the giant dust clouds that are blocking his vision, Kawaki has already shrank. He zipped over behind Jura, resized, and this time he slammed his ninja tech arm into Jura from behind, purposely not letting up, doing everything he can to buy Boruto the time needed to lock onto the location with his flying Raijin marker. However, Jura quickly rebounds from getting thrown around by Kawaki, and he jumps off a nearby hill, uses the momentum, and he flies back into the air to try to close the gap on Kawaki, who just narrowly blocks Jura's middle finger attack meant to penetrate Kawaki. The two of them quickly begin going back and forth with a parry of attacks, and Jura, for a man on one leg at this point adjusting in real time, it is making this whole back and forth even more impressive considering the movements. But unfortunately for Jura, Kawaki isn't just a guy swinging a BBCR around. When he whips out that big black chakra rod, it does more than penetrate Jura with its force, but it also spits out multiple shots of chakra into Jura's body. Even worse, when Kawaki's shooting those blasts off from the chakra rods, it's the method in which he does so that makes this entire sequence so devious. Kawaki wasn't just going for body shots. He was attacking the liver of Jura, which is a next level IQ to weigh down your enemy because it is crucial damage, and shooting the chakra blast through the end of the chakra rod into that section of the body just shows you that Kawaki, even though he's trying to buy time, he is still fighting with killing intent, and somewhere from deep down below, that monk formerly known as Jigen is looking up at Kawaki, swinging that chakra rod around, and he's going, "That's my boy," because when Jigen used to train Kawaki, he got that big black chakra rod smashed into his face a lot. What we're seeing is the very combat style that is ingrained into Kawaki through years of beatings at the hand of Jigen, but now that he has Ishiki's karma seal cut on, he's also drawing on Ishiki's combat experience as well. But what's interesting is that this method of fighting, shooting the chakra blast through the chakra rods, isn't something we ever saw Ishiki or Jigen do, which is a shame, but it also speaks a large volume to the testament of the amount of power that Jigen and Ishiki were holding back when they were playing around with Naruto and Sasuke. The two wonder reincarnation twins, Naruto and Sasuke, they weren't able to force those guys to go as deep into their bag as Jura is making Kawaki do. Meanwhile, Boruto watches the scene and he's gasping for air as he's holding onto his arm to fight off the karma seal, telling himself to calm down, and that's where we see a change occurring. The lines of his karma seal, they used to be thick. They have now begun to recede back to their normal form into the palm of his hand, and it isn't because of anything that Boruto himself has done. Instead, it is Kawaki who has now cut off his karma seal, thus breaking the resonance of their karma. Kawaki slowly marches forward towards Jura, who has several holes blown into him, perhaps a little too overconfident, and as he's doing so, we see the ninja ninja tech in Kawaki's body being brought into focus. In particular, the ninja tech in his eyes. Sumire and Amado, they're watching the battle unfold, and Sumire, she is of the belief that Kawaki is not only pressuring Jura, but her words, "At this rate, he might," it implies that she truly believes Kawaki has a way to kill Jura, a chance to do the impossible. But Amado, that sussy baka, he knows better. And sure enough, Jura, despite having his side blown off and having several holes in his body, he's less worried about Kawaki and he's more worried about opening up his book in order to catch up on his reading. The most unserious villain is about to start flexing. He flips to the pages that he has on Kawaki and he compares what is written down about Kawaki's combat power to what he just experienced, and we see Jura's fatal flaw begin to pop up with this character. He's curious. He wants to know how Kawaki powered up so quickly, and then as he's watching Kawaki, he realizes the truth. This isn't just a power-up. It's a lot more than that. It's a response to that feeling of something precious being threatened, and he's beginning to connect the dots. Himawari powered up when it was clear that Inojin was going to die. Sarada powered up in response to Yodo's death, and the prodding of Yodo for Sarada to embrace her feelings for Boruto. In both cases, the two girls who transformed into beings capable of far greater levels of power than they had previously shown, that was a big deal. And as Sumire is more focused on the fact that Sarada got a power-up that she didn't know about, Jura states that he sees a connection. It's that pesky word called love that made them even stronger, and he can't understand it and how it makes Shinobi stronger. And based on the comments that I've seen surrounding this arc, where people don't truly grasp how love leads to these power-ups and why Ikimoto is continuously hammering home the theme of love, I want to take a minute to explain something that might be lost in translation, because I know for a lot of people it's been a while since they've read Naruto or even gone back and watched Naruto. So allow me to explain. This isn't Ikimoto trying his hands at shoujo romance slop writing, where there's a power of romantic feelings that leads to power amp. While you can argue he's dabbling in something like that, what this is truly at its core, it is a continuation of what we were told several times in Naruto's manga. The third Hokage told us on 3 different occasions in Naruto Part 1. The moment where a shinobi can call forth their most dazzling strength, their true power, their hidden power, is when they are fighting to protect someone or something precious to them. It can be romantic reasons, like we saw in the Minato one-shot chapter where Minato powered up in order to save Kushina from Kurama. It can be for the love of one's village, like we saw when Hiruzen found strength against Orochimaru long after Hiruzen's body had begun to give out. It can be for the love of the next generation, like we saw Might Guy do against Madara and Naruto do when he protected the village from Momoshiki at the Chunin exams. It's as Haku told Naruto in the very first arc of the series. When a person has something that they wish to protect, they tap into their true power. The irony of the situation is that you have two people in a conversation, albeit a one-sided one, about how love brings forth power in shinobi, yet neither of them are shinobi and they don't understand the shinobi way of doing things. Now, I want to draw your attention to this irony because this is very intentional by Ikimoto. Jura is seeking answers, and Kawaki, despite being the son of a shinobi, his drunken father who sold him to Jigen, and having pretended to be the son of the Hokage and lived in a ninja village for the last 3 years, Kawaki does not understand that either, which makes his response so poetic. Kawaki calls Jura a pest, and he cuts on his Koma and fires a chakra blast through his ninja attack at Jura at point blank range with the intention to kill him. However, out the smoke rises Jura, who not only has repaired himself using the tree roots from that Ten Tails dimension, but the guy has made himself a throne high into the air, and he is aura farming by crossing his legs and holding up a finger to his upper lip, telling Kawaki that he doesn't truly want to fight. He merely wants to converse with him, and the topic of conversation is how Kawaki decided to save Boruto, which strikes Jura as odd because the only thing Jura ever read that Kawaki cared about was Naruto Uzumaki, and as Jura is looking down at Kawaki from his throne high up in the sky, he's putting the pieces together. However, what's interesting here is just the imagery itself. I want to bring your attention to that. Jura is high up on that throne, looking down at Kawaki in a judgmental way, like a god looking down at the mere mortals beneath his feet. it shows a distance between the two, while also in a poetic way having Jura be the judge who is forcing Kawaki to own up to the most heinous lie that he's told for the last 3 years, which is the death of Naruto and that Boruto killed him, when in reality, Naruto has been sealed away. If you've ever been in a courtroom, which I pray none of you guys have, you get the feeling that I'm talking about. When you're looking up at a judge and you're hoping that they take it easy on you, but you're not certain. That's where Kawaki is right now, but Jura isn't one to dish out mercy. He tells Kawaki that he knows Naruto is alive, and he smiles as he says it because Kawaki's face gave the truth away. Jura reveals that he still maintains the plan to consume Naruto, and he gives his reason for it. Naruto is the intermediary between the tailed beasts, their hearts and their minds. That's what he's after. For a reminder, I know somebody's gonna say, well, Naruto doesn't have Biju Chakra. Boruto's anime confirmed it in episode 219. Boruto's anime and manga, they're two different continuities according to Boruto's editor. You cannot use what's in the anime for the manga. But what Jura says here makes complete sense when you stop and think about it and you just go by Naruto's manga. In Naruto chapter 692, after Hagoromo had already taken the chakra seals from Naruto and Sasuke, which he does the moment that Kaguya is defeated, he tells the 9 Biju that are gathered that a small piece of their chakra resides in Naruto. He is a gathering place for them, and that Kurama is the overseer of that Biju sanctuary for them to gather. Naruto, by Hagoromo's own words, has the chakra, the 9 Biju, and we see him tap into some of that chakra in the battle with Delta, where he tries to use lava release Rasen Shuriken against Delta when he tried to cut off her legs to immobilize her until he learned that she could regenerate. Losing Kurama means losing the overseer to that sanctuary, the same way that Kawaki losing the Koma seal kept him from getting Ishiki's power in combat. The same analogy that Amado gave to Kawaki about Ishiki applies here. I want you to think about a house. The previous owner of the house left with a key and then they died. That was the only key, yet everything in the house is still there waiting to be accessed if you can get hold of a key. Kawaki's house had Ishiki's chakra in it. Naruto's house had the chakra of the other 8 Biju. But just as Kawaki had no key with the Koma seal gone, Naruto had no key with Kurama gone, since he is the gatekeeper to that sanctuary. Jura wanting Naruto, and likely Himawari, feels to a lesser degree like a plotline from Naruto. Someone in search of Biju chakra inside of a Jinchuriki. It's a very specific line here by Jura, one that gives him a good reason to hold off on killing Kawaki in the future, despite Kawaki's massive power increase, as well as a further reason to look into Himawari, because Jura will now question why Himawari has one of the tailed beasts that should be inside of Naruto. I bring that up to say this is another example of what Kashin Koji previously warned Boruto about. When you change the future, a new path pops up. Jura previously had not made that connection, but now seeing Kawaki and knowing for himself that Naruto is alive, it has potentially opened up more branches that Koji has to begin coming up with counters for, if he can do so. That leads to Boruto stepping in right as Kawaki begins to charge, and Jura looks a bit let down that Boruto is here and is able to use the flying Raijin to teleport them away. But before they leave, Kawaki channels some of that same energy that the Road to the Ninja version of Hinata that Naruto series Masashi Kishimoto created when he did that special manga chapter for the Road to the Ninja, as well as the storyboards for Naruto Shippuden's movie, The Road to the Ninja. Kawaki flips off Jura in the process of swearing to kill him the next time they meet. That brings us back to Konohamaru, who is with Delta, and we get a comedic scene where Delta tells Konohamaru not to stand so close to that flying Raijin marker, and seconds later, Konohamaru gets his face stepped on by Kawaki the same way that Boruto stepped on Code's face, and we see a bit of comedy with Konohamaru shouting at Kawaki for making his face a doormat for Kawaki's dirty shoes, and probably for getting some sand in his eye in the process. But Boruto quickly apologizes for the teleportation gaffe and asks about the Thorn Soul Bulb of Matsuri, and says they need to head back to Konoha, likely to revive Moegi by using the Thorn Soul Bulb. As this is going on, we get another dark update about how Boruto changed the timeline. Ada seems relieved that everything's working out, but Kashin Koji tells her Boruto changed the future, and she doesn't need to be worried about Boruto anymore. She needs to be worried about herself, because he reveals what he saw in the future, and it was Mamushi being on the move going after Ada specifically, which that grosses her out, but she has every reason to be afraid. If we go back to the last chapter, when Kashin Koji got his timeline update, if you look very closely at the images that Koji saw, one of the images was a future that showed Mamushi somewhere. We don't know where. And he had several copies of himself in the background, and now we have the context. He was confronting Ada, which means her one-way, all-expenses-paid ticket to Mamushi Island comes with a complimentary bottle of baby oil, a hot tub of baby oil, Mamushi likely blowing up a car that belonged to Kawaki while it's playing a Kid Cudi song, and Mamushi Island flight logs and Mamushi Island client list won't ever be found because Ada simps, Code, and Konohamaru were the ones who wrote the list in order to set Mamushi up. If you know what that's a reference for, you are a 1% subscriber here on the channel, and you can join all the monkeys in the pocket dimension writing hashtag Mamushi Party, hashtag Super Simp, hashtag Super Code Shit down in the comment section below. Jokes aside though, for as bad as this looks for Ada, at least this means that Damon versus Mamushi is finally about to be coming in the future, but now we have to ask a question. Can Damon, a boy who said in chapter 80 of Boruto Naruto Next Generations he's never fought at full power, can Damon actually win against Mamushi? And that's going to be interesting, particularly given the meaning behind Mamushi's name. With him being named after the most venomous snake in Japan, you have to wonder what will happen to Damon or Ada when he sinks his fangs deep inside of them. Back at the Shinju hideout, we see Hidari has joined Jura's book club, and as he's reading the books, we see Hidari channeling some of Sasuke's personality as he speaks to Jura, who seems very pleased by his interaction with Kawaki, and Hidari decides to use the word of the day that he's learned, which the word of the day today is disgusting, and he states that he finds it disgusting that Jura is behaving in this way, which for context, in the Q&A that celebrated the Boruto manga having 9 years of serialization, Ikimoto revealed that the personalities of the Shinju are a direct reflection of the true nature of the person whose chakra they are made from. Hence, we're seeing a bit of those Sasuke tendencies starting to show up inside of Hidari. However, Boruto and company now are headed back to Konoha to unseal Matsuri, bringing a close to this arc and taking us into the next arc of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex. Which, to discover that arc and more, click here on the left to check out the Boruto full story playlist. And if the next arc isn't finished, you can click here on the right to check out the Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter reviews. You want to start at chapter 25 and go onward.